Opening the South Maui Community Plan Advisory Committee meeting at 5:31 p.m. And let's start with a roll call.
Chair Rob Weltman, Vice Chair Daniel Kanahele.
I'm here.
Everett Dowling.
Here.
Randolph Leach.
Here.
Mike Moran.
Present.
Wayne Ishiki. Kiyoki Falzer.
Here.
And I've been informed that Tova Calendar, Jennifer Sullivan, and Brian Ward are excused. Do we have Lihuanani Huddleston Havoka and Cody Nemitz virtually at this point?
Cody is.
Cody is present.
We can add Lehua if she shows up either online or in person. She did write to me that she's coming. Okay, so we have quorum, but we're kind of short in terms of numbers compared to what we usually have. Velina mai na lalo le ke komike o lalo o kaiulu no ka papa ho lala no Maui hama. Velina mai na ho I ka poe o ke ena ho lala o ke kalana o Maui a me ka dahu o Maui ne. I ku ka kako I ke ahi ahi ina kuhi pono ho no ka hoohana ana I na mahele aina. Mahope e kuka kako I ka hoohana ana I na apana o maalaya a kihe a kau I ka vai hiki mai ai. I have a few housekeeping things here. First, our agenda today, first we're going to review and decide on land use designations to be used throughout South Maui. And after that, we'll review we have to finish up a little bit of what we have left over from last time on Ma'alaya, and then work on the proposed land uses in the North Kihei sub-area. And I wanted to point out we received a lot of testimony about the need for sufficient infrastructure before building out additional areas Mauka of the highway. And this is in particular Kihei Mauka, because we're already maxed out on the highway and South Kihei Road several hours per day, and there are many additional developments on the book already. So how do we make it clear in the community plan that additional development should not proceed without addressing the infrastructure needs? So after consulting with the Long Range Division, I think we should circle back to policies after we have finished the sub-area, all the sub-areas, and add very specific conditions there in the policies. To that end, please think about what additional policies are needed as we discuss North Kihei today, and let me know. So I've started a list from the testimony we have received, so as you think of things, I'll just add to the list and we can come back to them later. Today is an important day because for the first time we have the ability for remote testimony. So hopefully we'll have more people than you can see in the room today actually watching and participating and maybe even testifying. But this is our first time, and to make things work, I ask that if there are clarifying questions to remote testifiers, please be sure you always turn off your microphone immediately after asking your question, so you don't have your microphone on at the same time as we're receiving remote testimony.
Before we jump into testimony, I just wanted to acknowledge that Vernon is present. I marked you down, but I failed to call on you. I apologize. And Lihuanani is currently present as well.
Excellent. Okay, so we have those three items that the public can testify on: the land use designations, the Ma'alaya land use, and then the North Kihei land use. So opening up the public testimony.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair and Commission members. My name is Andra Amaral Kraus, and I'm here to testify regarding the north of Kihei and the infrastructure as well as the zoning. Right now, the Hayes property, again, not specifically, just to make an analogy, is asking for an M1 district to have a base yard, right? And I investigated the detriments of having a truck base yard right across the street from residences and because of the wind that'll bring the fumes from that property onto these children and kupunas. And these statistics I got from the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. And they ask, how are people exposed to exhaust? Exhaust particles, gases, are suspended in the air, so exposure to this pollutant occurs whenever a person breathes air that contains these substances. The prevalence of these substances makes it almost impossible to avoid exposure to these exhausts or its byproducts, regardless of whether you live in a rural or urban setting. However, people living right across or working in an area of this type are more likely to be exposed to this pollutant. Those spending time on or near roads, loading, operating, powered machinery, or working near these equipment face exposure to high levels of exhaust and face higher health risks. Are truck fumes dangerous? Short-term exposure causes some damage or eyes and nose irritation. Very high levels of this exposure can lead to asphyxiation from carbon monoxide and other poisonings that is unseen to the eye. Is it dangerous to breathe in these fumes? Exposure to these fumes, exhaust, can have immediate health effects. These fumes, exhaust, can irritate eyes, nose, blank, 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 headaches, lightheadedness, and possibly death. This is my humble testimony. I'm sorry, but I gotta run. We have a family member in need, and I appreciate you guys being here, but I just did want to read this into the testimony. And basically, from all the people in the neighborhood that I come here, the one thing that they all said that was in commonality was, please keep our families, children, and kupuna safe. We have lived here. Do not put toxic fumes across from our hale. And I leave you my testimony, and that's it.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for the testifier? Vernon?
Sandra, is that M1 zoning yet or not yet?
No, they're going for it.
Okay.
They're going for it. And M1 zoning also, guys, you know, with M1 zoning, you get that classification, but then there are so many, what did I get? Within the M1 district, yeah, they have exemptions ranging from 1 to 31 different exemptions, all interference with what we call a harmonious residential area. So yes, and this I got directly off of our county planning and zoning division, the definition of M1 and what they're capable of doing. So I would strictly admonish to all of you, or humbly ask, that all of you learn about M1 zoning. It's not as harmonious to the neighborhood as it seems. So I ask you, if you need to rewrite, do it, because this is the opportunity. I'm sorry, did I answer, sweetheart, your question? Mahalo. Mahalo.
Mike, clarifying question?
Yeah, Sandra, could you explain where this location is? I don't think everybody knows. I know, but
Yes,
for the team.
Okay. As you come up Ohukai Mauka, there was an old Hashimoto mango farm. And for those of you born and raised here, you know exactly where I'm talking about. The place we used to go catch chickens, yeah? And pick mangoes, yeah, Vernon? But that's where it is. He bought that area, the entire area. And according to, that's another thing really, Mike, that in that area, he bought several thousands of acres. 14.5 of the acres is what is being asked to be rezoned, just short of the 15.1 acres needed to make it to the State Land Use Commission. They have avoided that. When I asked their planner why, and he said, Xander, developer's been doing this for ages. And I'm sorry. I know you're here, and I apologize, but loopholes like that gotta be done away with. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
Yes, mahalo.
Any other clarifying questions? Daniel?
Alexandra.
Hello.
Just two questions. The first is, I'll ask them together.
I'm sorry, what?
Is M1 zoning a permitted use? And the other question is, has this gone before the Maui Planning Commission?
No, it has not. It has not, because we requested, or Mike Moran and the Kihei community made a request to the planning department that it go before the Kihei Advisory Committee, of which they decided needed to go through the commission. So we're awaiting the date. Your next question?
Is M1 used, is it allowed or permitted use on that property?
If it was a permitted use, they wouldn't be going through the process, Daniel.
I mean, they don't need
Yeah.
to.
They don't
okay.
need to go through the, yeah.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. They want to make it a permitted use. But you don't put fumes across the street from children, families, and kupuna who have lived there for 30 years. That's unfathomable. Not to mention the trucks on the road, where Ohukai we know is already overtaxed with. Yeah, they say they're not going to come down. What is to prevent them from using all these exemptions to expand their permitted use, because the law stipulates that under the code today, under M1, they are allowed. And no assurances they can give me verbally will make the community feel any safer. But I thank you guys very much.
Any other clarifying questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next
Thank you.
testifier. Next testifier.
Hi. Doug Ballards, South Maui resident and also with Maui Tomorrow. I think you would have received by now, and our apologies for not getting it in sooner, but Albert Perez's written testimony, which contained a lot of things. I'm going to touch on some of those things. In particular, the need for clarity in the designations. And if you imagine yourself as a planner who's sitting across from a developer, you know, how will that planner interpret the words that you're agreeing to, unless there's some sense of clarity expressing your vision? Definitions section may be helpful in that regard. We used as an example the term commercial at a previous testimony, and it can mean a lot of different things if you look in a dictionary. So, you know, what is meant by that? And there are other examples too. So that might be something you'd want to look at. The residential category for low and medium density lumps single family, medium density multifamily, and limited commercial, small commercial in one category. It might be best to consider two categories, one single family, perhaps allowing ohanas and whatever, and the other a more moderate density residential. That can include single family as well. One of the underpinnings of zoning has always been the protection of residential neighborhoods from uses that perhaps might not be compatible, and so that might help in that regard. Want to talk about sub-area 2 North Kihei for a second, and the small town center designation. In the amended map, there's a very large area that's really contiguous to an area that had already been designated for small town center, and that was also designated for small town center. So you're dealing with a large area property, small town center, large area property that's not small at all, small town center. It's not near the center of anything at all. It's on the urban fringe. And our fear is that it will create a competing center of gravity. Commercial is a major designated use within that small town center category. And it's important, we think, to again, not rely solely on speculative development plans. Markets change, developer plans change, developers change. So think of the types of uses you'd like to see. Think of maybe what the most intensive uses that might be allowable under the designations you're deciding on, and whether that's what your intent really is. And also, not everything needs to be developed at this time. So anyway, I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions for Doug? Daniel?
Hello, Doug. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to read through the written testimony that we got before the meeting, but what was Maui Tomorrow recommending another land use designation for Maukaupi'ilani Highway? And what's there on the map right now are just recommendations. They're not set in concrete.
Correct. I mean, these are proposed maps. And this is, I think it's called, well, I forget what the name of the area is specifically called, but it's Mauka of the Mega Mall site and also to the north. And it would create small town center all the way to the urban boundary. And so I'm not answering your question. Perhaps I didn't. Could you repeat it then?
I was asking if you had another land use designation recommendation for that area other than small town center.
Yes. Well, there is, and in the written testimony, it speaks about the need for residential and affordable residential, for workforce housing and other things, and those areas could be, very well used in terms of a more residential type of development, as opposed to development that could include a fairly substantial amount of commercial. And you could also decide that it should remain ag, too. But it does seem like the need for affordable housing is great, and perhaps those land uses might be considered.
More clarifying questions for Doug? Thank you. Next testifier.
Good evening. My name is Robert Stoner. I'm with S&F Land Company, and we're the owners of Central Maui Base Yard. I want to thank all of you for your commitment and volunteering to this committee and your commitment to Maui's future. I'm here because in 2000, I'm assuming all of you are familiar with Central Maui Base Yard and the area where the northernmost part of the boundary, about 50 acres of industrial properties owned M1 and M2. Back in 2008 and 2010, we worked quite closely with the long-range planning and on the general plan to put another 110 acres into urban planning for industrial use there. Subsequently, on the South Maui plan, when it came out, they reduced that to 65. They did not consult with us. I was told they consulted with one of the landowners. We leased the property from A and B at this time, but the property that we're talking about is owned by both A and B and Mahi Pono, who we've been in discussions with, both parties, and wanting to continue to work with the 110 acres that were initially established. I'm asking that we go back and honor what was in the general plan and have the 110 acres be committed to for future industrial use. Obviously, this will take some time to build out. I feel we offer something to Maui that's hard to find, that's small industrial lots. We're also isolated, kind of going back to the previous testifier. There's no residential area around us. We have one entry to the highway. It's easy for people to get to. And it has been an incubator for small businesses on Maui that have grown to become bigger businesses. So we'd like to continue that effort. And so again, we ask that you consider going back to the original 110 acres that were on the general plan back for 2030. Thank you.
I see Daniel is reaching for his microphone, but I have a question first. So when you say the 110 acres, is that on the Maui Island plan?
It was on the Maui Island plan, yes.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Daniel?
Sorry, sir, I wasn't able to make out your name, if you choose to give it.
Oh, Robert Stoner, I'm sorry.
Stoner?
Yes.
And you represent the owners of the Central
We are the
Maui?
owners and operators of,
You are the owner?
my father is the actual owner, so, yes.
Okay. Your understanding is that in the current plan, it's recommending 64 acres of expansion versus 110?
Yes, currently, there actually says 66 acres versus what, the initial 110 that was on the 2030 general plan.
And you think that's insufficient for the base yard?
I think this is a long-term growth plan, so is it immediately insufficient? No. In the long term, I think as things expand, if it was agreeable in 2008 and 2010, I would have liked to have had some discussion perhaps with long-range planning as to why they wanted to shrink it, so I'm happy to have those discussions.
No, I think you still can have those discussions. I mean, we're still...
No, yeah, I understand. Thanks.
Also, is your understanding that the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is also going to build use some of their land for industrial use purposes?
They have spoken of that. It seems to go in fits and starts. I remember at some time money was allocated for it, and they were going to, I think theirs is going to be more commercial in use. It was also going to be much more expensive, I believe. I think the one thing that we provide that other areas don't provide is that I get calls for 2,000 square feet, 5,000 square feet, and the way that we originally designed the base yard, we're able to adapt to those needs. Yes, there is a long-term plan for that, but I think we differ in what we offer and what we do. I think we offer perhaps more affordability to potential tenants. So, you know, we're getting people that come in that don't have a lot of money and want to have a landscape business base yard, a small construction base yard, and that sort of thing. I don't think what they are doing is going to necessarily appeal to that crowd. So that's probably our difference.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robert Stoner. Really nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
A question from Ronan?
Yeah, so the DHHL lands, is it around Central
No,
Maui?
as I understand it, the DHL land, there's two portions on either side of the highway. Years ago, they spoke about leasing 80 acres or 40 acres. That kind of fell through right around 2000, 2011. I know there was talk of a Walmart superstore and that potential thing going in there. But the development that I think that Daniel was referring to is that on the Haleakala side. It would sit south of where we are. You know where the new Goodfellow development, Palehunui is? I think it's on that access road, kind of between that area. So where the drag strip is and that rough area, I believe is where the DHHL land is.
Yeah, I think that's for clarification. That's why I was asking, because I know at the Humane Society that huge
Right. That was
that's commercial, yeah.
Yeah.
For them, yeah.
Yeah, they were going to do I think a 20-year lease at one point, and that didn't go through. So. Mm-hmm.
So to help us process this request, can you give us like a sense of, like, are you looking at a 10-year perspective, 20-year, 50-year to
I
really
think
need
it's,
110 acres?
in fairness, I would say it's probably a 20 to 30-year. The way we did Central Maui Base Yard is we built it out over time. My father started this in the early 1980s, initially with about 18 acres with the commitment. We leased the property from, at that time, A and B. So we kind of grew it in 5 to 10 acre increments as demand was created. So we'd like to continue the same process. We've had discussions with both A and B and Mahi Pono on the properties that we're discussing to do this.
The reason I'm asking is what I'm trying to get at is would 66 acres do you for like 10, 15 years, and then or is they already butting up against the limits?
I can't speak to that. I mean, I would, again, being long-term thinking, if you have the area dedicated, even if it took 20 or 30 years, it seems to make sense to me that, I mean, that's what we did in again 2008 to 2010 with long-range planning and the general plan. So, Where the demand goes, it's a peak and valley situation. I will tell you this, I get calls continually for property that I can't offer right now.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mike?
Thank you for coming and addressing this. Many in the community are not so familiar with it. They just drive by on the highway. I believe the DLNR also has land out there, and they're also were proposing to do some development out there of that same nature. Again, with state government, we never know. I mean, they gave a presentation several years ago. I don't know what is going on. But my specific question to you is about how much of the land you're actually using at this time? Do you know that about?
Yes, we have just a little over 50 acres. I would say 10 acres are roadways and access, and the remaining 40 is leased property, varying in size from 3 acres to 2,000 square feet, and we represent about 150 different tenants out there. Again, to that point, and what Vernon brought up, the DHHL, I think, differs in what we do and what we offer. Theirs was more commercial in industry that was going to require substantial, I think up to $1 billion of infrastructure, and that was part of the, so if you put $1 billion of infrastructure in there, you have to figure out how you're going to get your money out of that as well, and that's a challenge. So.
Thank you for answering that. And so do you think that applies to the DLNR as well?
I believe that's the same properties that were there. There's two, I'm not sure, and I believe it's roughly 600 acres out there in total that is controlled. Maybe, don't hold me to that number, on both sides of the road. I've heard various things. I know the program that you're speaking of, I think it goes back 4 or 5 years ago. They made a presentation. They went down the road with doing this. I don't think they found the demand, and I think that, again, that was going to be more commercial in nature than what we are, which is more industrial and really just basic base yard space for people to park their, we have 8 granite guys out there. We have mechanics and auto body people. And to, the previous testifier's point, we have the businesses that people don't want to see or in their neighborhood, and even in something such as that, perhaps. Thank
you. And I know when I went to their presentation, and again, that was the DLNR, and we asked them, well, what has that got to do with your, and they said, it's just a way to get revenue. We just want to develop that land to bring in money because we're underfunded.
Yes.
So, but thank you for answering my questions. Mahalo.
Thanks.
Any other clarifying questions? Daniel?
No, I don't have a question. Just a point of order. Are we going to be alternating, going to online to ask if there's anybody online and in-person testimony?
I was just waiting to see how many testifiers we have in person first to see. I mean, if we don't have that many, then it's not really an issue. Any other clarifying questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Next testifier.
Good evening, CPAC members. Rory Frampton here again. I'm a land use planning consultant for Haleakala and Konoulu ranches. I did a fairly detailed presentation 2 weeks ago that talked about Kihei Mauka, and I'll just briefly touch on a couple of the main points again tonight, and I'll be available later on if there's an opportunity for questions. Both ranches see Kihei Mauka as an area that provides an opportunity to address future community needs while also protecting the integrity and legacy of the remaining lands of both ranches. The natural characteristics are very favorable for growth in terms of topography and quality of the ag lands and the flora and fauna. Also, there's relatively fewer archaeological sites in this area compared to other sites, although there are some significant sites that will definitely be preserved. It's been looked at as a logical area for future growth because of its location in North Kihei and its proximity to the high school, to future and planned growth areas, as well as the Kihei Charter School and Maui Research and Technology Park. The vision is really to provide a master plan community to address resident needs, and that's really the focus. There's been concerns expressed about how much commercial is going to be there. The intent is not to create a commercial node, and we're happy to work with language to address that, to make sure that the emphasis that's placed in this area is really to meet resident needs. We will incorporate, or the project will incorporate, progressively designed areas in terms of the urban planning and design principles. And there's a whole list of those that we've included in our presentation. An important point is that this is a long-term plan, and it's not going to materialize overnight. It's going to take many years. It's well beyond the 10 to 20-year time horizon for this community plan. But really, by including the size and a scale of this area, of this magnitude, you have the opportunity to include or to plan for and anticipate sites for schools and parks and roadways and other things that are necessary for a complete community. And I like to use the Maui Lani and Kehalani project districts as examples. It took almost 20 years of planning efforts and entitlements before they got even started with construction, and they're still in the process of building out. But by including that large scale, they do have the streets, the roadways, the schools, and the parks that are necessary for complete communities. In terms of the infrastructure requirements, this project area will have to go through a full-blown EIS, state district boundary amendment, and a change in zoning, and there's going to be detailed studies on traffic, on wastewater, and the like, and all that will be hammered out in detail with conditions that get attached to the project. So there will be a lot of detailed review in the future. That sums it up. We support the planning department's recommendations to include this area in the North Kihei area. And I should point out that it's right now we're looking at this North Kihei area, the way planning department bifurcated it. It includes 2/3 of the Kihei Mauka area, and there's another third that you guys will be looking at the next regional discussion. So I'm available now or later on if you guys see fit for any questions.
Any clarifying questions? Daniel?
So one of the concerns that was brought up by a previous testifier is small town centers, and as in the proposal right now, there's a lot of small town centers near the Pi'ilani Highway. Do you think that should be changed, that we should have maybe residential near the Pi'ilani Highway and have small town centers away from Pi'ilani Highway? So, because, yeah, that's my question.
That if you're referring to the former Pi'ilani Promenade area, that's complicated because of the various legal things that went on with that and the Land Use Commission and what they've been told to do, and so I'll leave that for others to decide. I think in the area that we're looking at, I think it is appropriate to have mostly residential with opportunities for small scale commercial type stuff to serve the area.
And do you have some idea what the mix should be of residential versus, commercial? Like 90% residential, 10% commercial?
I'd say it would be somewhere between 80 and 90% is just off the top of my head without doing any calculations.
80, 90% residential?
Let's say 80% residential. It might be a little lower if you throw in parks, public facilities like schools, that type of stuff. I think the percentage of residential might be a little lower. I haven't done the calculations, but it's going to be primarily residential. It's not going to be like 50-50 commercial versus residential. Commercial is going to be a small component, and there'll be other public facilities, needs, recreational areas, the archaeological sites, the open space buffers along the gulches, which will be really important. All that will, be other components of the project. But the major, in terms of developed use, most of it's going to be residential, and we're happy to, work with this group to provide some more definition to that.
Thank you, Roy.
You're welcome.
Wayne?
Rory, I'm not going to let you sidestep the issue. You talk about residents' needs. I'm talking about housing. You're looking for entitlements as a landowner. I'm talking about, what about the local people that need housing? You lived in this community a long time, boy. How come you as landowners here on Maui want entitlements from us, yet you don't want to give nothing to the community that needs affordable housing?
I don't know where
I want to hear your answer.
I don't know where that statement comes from, Wayne. What he was asking me about was a property that's not the landowner. The land that we're talking about is going to be for resident housing. It's going to be for residential Maui residents. We're not talking resort communities. We're not talking high-end kind of stuff. We're talking to meet the needs for future residents of Maui. Or the kids that are about that big right now are the people that we're going to be targeting. What I didn't answer, what I sidestepped from Daniel was he was asking me about the neighboring property that's had a lot of controversy, and I don't know what the uses are going to be over there. But in terms of this property, it's going to be exactly what you just said, to address Maui residential needs.
How come you guys don't volunteer to give affordable land for affordable housing?
We need the entitlements, and we're working with people right now. We're in discussions that would focus this area. The focus of this area would be primarily workforce housing.
Any other questions? Lihua? Oh, okay. So I would actually recommend that we ask Rory to stay as a resource person, because I think we're going to have a lot of questions from him as we get into discussions around Kihimauka. Any objections? Okay. Can you stay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wayne?
Is Rory involved with the 400 acres as being recommended by the planning department?
Yes.
Can I ask him that question?
Yes?
Good. You want entitlements for another 400 acres? On top of that, 500 acres?
No.
You're asking for 1,000 acres.
That's no.
You want to urbanize.
No. The 400 acres is a subset. It's a small portion of it's 400 acres of the almost 600 acres that are in the Maui Island Plan. We're not asking to go beyond the Maui Island Plan. Maui Island Plan was just under 600 acres. In this subregion that they've designated on the map, they drew a line through 2/3 of it. So that's why only 400 some odd acres of the 600 acres are being discussed tonight. It's the way the department carved up these regional areas. So we're not asking for more than what's in the urban, the Maui Island Plan urban growth boundary.
You obviously tried to sneak under the back door and approach the planning department on these 400 acres. And I'm not accusing you of anything. Why is 400 acres so important?
It's what I was talking about earlier, so that you can plan for the appropriate size community, so that you're, rather than piecemealing and only doing fragmented planning, you're looking at what's going to be there in the long term, so that you can plan for the parks, so that you can plan for the proper roadways. If you're only doing a little bit at a time and there's no guarantee of what the long-term scope is going to be, you don't know you might undersize your infrastructure. You might not have sites for parks and for schools. So it's not just because you put it on the map doesn't mean it's going to get built. But if you do put it on the map, it will be planned for and it'll be looked at and it'll be considered by the government agencies when they're planning for the schools and the parks and the infrastructure.
Anyway, Rory, I think you guys are greedy. You want
Point of order.
cake and you want to
okay.
eat it too.
Point of order.
Yeah.
Personal attacks, there's no place for personal attacks, Wayne.
Yeah, I think we're done. Any further questions, clarifying questions for the testifier? Thank you. So stay around and we
sure
may have
will.
questions for you in the future.
And thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Wayne.
Do we have someone waiting to testify remotely? Do we have someone waiting to testify remotely? We do? Okay.
The first is Mark Hyde.
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies. Thank you for, I hear an echo. Is there any way to deal with that? Maybe it's off. Thank you. I really appreciate your work and the opportunity to allow us to testify remotely. It's very helpful. I'd like to offer my remarks on the 88 acres of land located on Pi'ilani Highway between the high school and the Northern Light Industrial Park. It's bare land. In my letter to the Planning Department and their response to me, which I shared with you earlier, they invite you to take a fresh look at this property. In fact, they say that it's within your prerogative to decide what the best use is for this land. Regardless, I think, of who the ownership is currently, what their particular desires are. Your role is to define a plan that meets the community's needs. Now, when we take a look back at the last 30 years, as they ask you to do, what I see is we have been very, very good at developing property for second home owners. Take a look at Wailea and McKenna as a prime example, or Ledcor is going to bring 1,000 new units to our area for others. But where we have completely failed, is to build housing for our people who live and work here to the point where, as you know, families can't afford it. They have to leave the island. Their kids go off to school. They can't come back. That's a horrible situation that we're in, and it all comes down to housing. And as I've explained in my written testimony, which I hope that you will read, and I'm prepared to respond to that, communities thrive on diversity within them by co-locating housing with jobs. It's good for the environment, cuts down on traffic. It's good for the social fabric, and our social fabric is ripping apart because housing is so critical to quality of life, to quality of health, economic vitality. So what I would ask you to do, as the Planning Department invites you to do, is to take a step back. Imagine that you have a bulletin board in front of you, and on that bulletin board you draw a square, and the square is 88 acres of bare land. And then you distribute among yourselves stickies and pencils or pins, and each of you writes down what you think the best use for that land is given where we are and our deficits. And I would suggest to you that I believe most of you would write down housing and you put that sticky tape up there by that acreage. And that is what I'm recommending the use be for that land, that the 3 Pi'ilani parcels be dedicated to residential use, and that there be a true neighborhood center in the back, serving those residences. And by the way, the high school's next door. There are other residential communities across the street. And bear in mind that traffic from residents is significantly less than commercial. And this property comes prepackaged with a requirement that there be 4 lanes of traffic coming out of it with a signalized intersection. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions for the testifier? Everett.
Mark, do you envision a multifamily on that property?
Absolutely. A mix of housing, Everett, can be a variety of things, sure.
And how does that jive with the, I've never read the settlement agreement, but wasn't there a lawsuit to say it needed to be light industrial?
Yes, it's Everett, it's very complicated. I did write a history in my written testimony, which might help you understand the ins and outs of that. Vernon brought this up at the last meeting. But the planning department, I raised that with the planning department, and they wrote back to me, and they basically said, hey, you guys can make your own determination. And then there will be a back-end process where we would take that forward, assuming that a land use designation is given of residential with zoning attached to that. That provides then a springboard to go back to the LUC and ask for an amendment. And I can tell you that after I and others appeared before the Land Use Commission for a period of 8 years, they really don't want to see us again. They want the community to resolve this. And you can do that. That's how I see it.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the testifier? Daniel, and then Vernon. Or Vernon and then Daniel.
Hey, how's it, Mark?
Hi, Vernon.
So, yeah, there's that stipulation in order. You're part of that. So you kind of signed that bugger and agreed to all of this go back to 95. Okay, so residential, that's what's, being introduced here. Next to a light industrial park and probably an expansion on that mango tree section, right? That is going to be another light industrial park. So because with the intervening status, it dragged on for a while, mahalo for Mr. Kanahele stepping up for that mega mall, or else we wouldn't have known or got involved at that time. But I'm just trying to picture this where, if we do homes there, residential or workforce, any type of homes that we put there, because it took so long, when there's settlements and things take a long time, the number add up. So that was the intent at the beginning, is try to get housing there. That never happened. But I'm just trying to picture, if we do housing or residential there, it's next to light industrial park, and probably a larger portion of Mauka of that park, the industrial park, will be another park. So I guess I'm trying to say is it's just in one junk location. If I'm living there, I'm gonna smell, hear all the noise. If there's residential there, so maybe gotta design them in a way where it's maybe closer to the gulch or something, or away from it, more towards the school, or some kind of mixed use. But I guess the point I'm trying to make on this, it's taking so long that is it really going to be affordable for housing? I just thinking the numbers.
Well, Vern, if I can respond. First of all, there is a gulch on the south side, and the high school's right next door. That's very desirable, I think. That would be true for the Pi'ilani Promenade South parcels, both of them. As to the Ko'onaulu Partners parcel of 13 acres in the rear, that would be next to what you described potentially as an expansion of light industrial. That could be a neighborhood shopping center that would truly serve the needs of residents because it's off the highway. As to the largest parcel, the Pi'ilani Promenade North parcel, it really isn't next to what I would call, heavy industrial use. The uses there include an awful lot of retail, as a matter of fact, and some light industrial uses, auto repair and that sort of thing in the back. And that's not uncommon, for neighborhoods to be next to services like that. In fact, not such a bad thing to be able to take your car around the corner or take your car into the Shell station there and get some gasoline. So I think that could all be adequately addressed with setbacks and so forth, and that to me is not a showstopper. I can't hear right now. Hello? Sorry, I couldn't hear your last comment, Bernard.
I'm trying again, Mark. We're having some audio issues. I think we're there. Mark, can you hear me now? Mark, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So I was, from what I hear you saying, you would like to, I've heard what you said about this, the southern part of this, area, 88 acres, and the northern part nearest the light industrial area is an area that you'd like to see mostly residential, with some, a little bit of commercial.
I believe should be neighborhood center. And neighborhood center would be small businesses.
Sorry, I've been instructed that after I ask your question, I need to shut my mic off. Yeah, well, your vision for the northern part of the 88 acres, except for the 13 acres, would be residential with some light commercial, correct?
No, I don't think light commercial is appropriate. I would treat the 3 Pi'ilani parcels for residential entirely, and I would convert the 13 acres in the back for a neighborhood center that would provide services to all of those residences. It's almost a quarter of the property. That to me should be sufficient for that kind of use in the back. But if you put commercial and perch that on top of Pi'ilani Highway and turn it into small town use, which is designed to attract traffic from neighborhoods outside the property, you're going to create a mini mega mall. And I don't think that that is appropriate use for a variety of reasons, because number one, we need housing, and number two, we don't need that traffic that's associated with commercial use perched on the highway. Being mindful, Daniel, that the subdivision agreement provides for 4 lanes of traffic coming out of that 88-acre parcel, connecting with an intersection on Pi'ilani Highway that is going to be signalized pursuant to an order of the Land Use Commission.
Thank you, Chair. That was the only question I had.
Any other questions for the testifier? Okay, let's take another testifier from the audience.
Great, okay, thank you. My name is Harry Lake. I'm CEO of Coa Partners, and we're affiliated with the 88 acres that we're talking about here, so this is great. I don't have any prepared remarks. My goal is to fly in and listen and take in advice from your great volunteering effort. And so we appreciate everything that you're doing. Born and raised in Hawaii, a little bit about myself. Born and raised in Hawaii. My family has deep roots here in Maui and Oahu. Graduated from McKinley High School, went to UH, served for the Hawaii Army National Guard. Kamehameha Schools helped fund my college at UH and on to Harvard. So I grew up in subsidized housing. I understand the benefits of it. I appreciate all the efforts on that. And we were engaged, Coa Partners was engaged as a steward to provide some healing on a property that was, hurting, and so it created some conflict. And so our goal was to come in, and provide that sense of stewardship, because we know it is an important piece of property in North Kihei, and we appreciate your efforts, and obviously it's garnered a lot of attention. We're committed to, and I'm committing on behalf of the ownership, to do exactly what we said we would do, and then also listen and pivot as needed, provided for by the community plan. And so my only constraints that I have is that it has to fall in line with the LUC agreement that we all collectively, many people in here signed up for. But within those constraints, as Mark has suggested virtually, I think there's opportunities there to be responsive to the plan if we all work together, which we would love to see housing, on the property. We would love to see a mixture of uses that would be consistent with a meaningful property on a highway adjacent to Kalani Hokoi High School. And so we think it's important. We also know the importance of infrastructure. As you know, we carved out an acre of land to provide a substation for MECO, or to provide a much needed substation that helped provide support and resolved a lot of the rolling brownouts that South Maui had for a while there. And so that's completed. We're also committed to providing much needed infrastructure on private dollars, nickel, to provide some much needed infrastructure to support water. There's an aging pipeline underneath the property right now. And as was mentioned, Department of Transportation also requires us to put basically the cornerstone of what would ultimately become the upcountry highway that would provide the much needed infrastructure to enable a north-south corridor collector road, and it starts right on our property. And we're committed to investing the significant capital to do that. So I'm here, if there's any questions, happy to answer them with you. I just want to introduce myself, our role. We weren't part of the original plan, but we're part of hopefully the future of something special there. So let me know if you guys need anything.
Any questions, Tessera? Daniel?
Yeah.
Mr. Lake, does your settlement agreement allow residential? Can you do residential given the agreement?
Right now it's light industrial, but it was tied to the way the county interpreted light industrial, which given the stack zoning, there is some understanding that we could do it. So I think what Mark is saying is accurate. He has a pretty good understanding of the document, and so we don't see any conflict if there's some guidance from the plan. I believe it should be a mixture of uses, just smart planning. One of the things that I probably divert from Mark a little bit is we think that the commercial shouldn't be tucked in the back. I don't think we'll have retailers survive there to support the neighborhood. We don't want more vacancy, but the idea of just being thoughtful within those parameters, we'd be absolutely responsive to that. And I believe the document does afford that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep.
Daniel?
I probably will have questions when we get to the section, but I was wondering if we could ask Harry to be a resource person.
I was going to ask that question too. So are there any objections? Can you stay for the discussion?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep.
And Chair, since Mr. Stoner is still here, can we make him a resource person too? Robert Stoner can we make him a resource person too? If we have any.
Well, first of all, can Robert Stoner stay?
That's fine.
Okay. And any objections? Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for testifier Lake? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have another remote testifier to offer?
The next is, I believe it's Cecil James, and if you could please turn on your camera. Cecil James, are you available? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next person.
Who did you call?
Cecil James. Suzelle, my apologies. Suzelle. The next testifier is Suzelle James, if you're available. Okay. Pardon me if I mispronounce Lehala Iwohi. Owahe.
We cannot hear you.
The first person called was Cecil James.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you. Please testify.
Okay.
3 minutes.
Sorry, I'm at the park, so the reception is really bad.
Now we can't hear you. Oh, the reception is really bad. I think we dropped you, so we'll come back because you only have one bar.
I think the reception is really bad, so we're going to move on to the next testifier. And the next testifier is Lehala Iwohi. Please unmute your mic. You have 3 minutes.
Aloha, Chair Weltman and committee members. Mahalo for the time and your commitment. I know it's voluntary and takes up a lot of time listening and going through all of this. This is a very huge opportunity for all of us to be here today and to have you guys make these tough decisions. My name is Lehala Iwohi, and I'm testifying on the community plan land use designation, item B on the agenda. And I'm testifying on behalf of the Hawaii Hotel Alliance. Part of HHA's goal is to help address the challenges that we as a community are dealing with in a number of concerns voiced by our community. As we navigate through a number of concerns voiced by the community, we try to address what we can. And I think someone else is on the line. So part of our goal is to be part of the solution with the decisions being made in the community, hence me being here today. So looking at, and I am so sorry, but there's something else in the back. So I hear the concerns on being more specific on the land use designations, but as explained by the planning department last week, designations are intended to guide development patterns, while zoning is more specific as to development standards and permitted uses. More so, zoning ordinances and community plans serve very different roles and should not be confused. Community plans typically provide more of a broad vision for future development of the community and include certain broader policies on land use, housing, and other aspects of community life that guide development decisions and provide a framework for future zoning regulations. My understanding, because I'm not an expert, is that they are not intended to be binding in the same way zoning laws are. The chair's proposal that you are considering today adds specific permitted uses allowed in each community plan designation. The tension between permitted uses in existing zoning laws and the community plan designations would cause confusion for the community. So it's not too clear what would happen if permitted uses in a zoning district conflicts with the permitted uses in the designated areas of the community plan. For example, the proposal includes about 4 permitted uses within the resort hotel zoning or hotel community plan designation, but the hotel zoning district includes 8 permitted uses and 12 accessory uses, some of which conflict with the chair's proposal. This is a very significant change for the community. So I'm not asking, I mean, what I am asking is just that I recommend seeking the advice of Corp Counsel, since there are different legal processes for creating zoning ordinances than there are for community plans. And this proposal could be challenged on that basis. So in closing, I ask that the committee adopt the more general framework recommended by the department instead, and not include specific permitted uses, so there is no confusion between the plan and the zoning laws. So mahalo for your time.
Any questions for the testifier? Daniel?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can. It's not too clear, but I can hear you.
Okay, the way this works is we ask a question and we have to turn our mic off after we ask it. Then you can answer, because then we won't get feedback. So what I hear you saying is that the community plan land use designations need to be broad, and that it is zoning that is more specific. Am I hearing you correctly?
Correct, and that's my understanding. Like I said, I'm not a planner. I'm not an expert at it, but I do know that the Department of Planning did make that recommendation last week. But yes, I'll just stick to the question. Yes.
My other question is, do you see zoning as a tool to implement the general plans, of which the community plan is a part?
So I think the land designation, well, that's why you have the designation, and then the zoning would be a little more specific. I believe that it could be and should be a tool, yes. Or
to implement
I guess I would
community
refer
plans?
back to the planning department.
Okay, thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Mike?
Aloha, thank you for testifying in our first challenging technical aspects this evening. But as Daniel said, I'll ask my question and then shut my microphone off. I'm sorry, I missed what is the organization that you're representing, please?
I'm testifying on behalf of the Hawaii Hotel Alliance.
Mahalo.
Any other questions for the testifier? Thank you. Do we have another testifier present in the room?
I just wanted to follow up on some of Mark Hyde's written testimony. He noted that as far as we know, there aren't any plans for significant state investments in our transportation infrastructure anytime in the next 10, 20, 30 years that are on the books. We don't have a bypass. We don't have significant expansions to the Pi'ilani. We don't have any other investment that's coming our way for infrastructure. And yet we're talking a lot, and we all have dreams of how we can expand our housing and we can expand other aspects of this area. But if we don't have the transportation infrastructure to support it, we're all going to be very unhappy, because we're all going to be stuck in traffic all the time. And there have been we now have a signal that's going in Okalani. We have another signal that they're talking about, and there's probably a couple of other signals that are coming onto the Pi'ilani Highway. It's going to get slower and more crowded and more difficult to navigate. It seems like we should try to come up with some concerted recommendations about how we're going to tie infrastructure support to what other development priorities that we want to have. And I don't have that sense from listening to our discussions over the weeks. We have a lot of conversations about this kind of housing and that kind of housing, and should we have this next to the highway? But we don't have this larger picture of, okay, that's going to require this much more roadway, or this much other support for mobility, of whatever kind it may be, buses or whatever, ideas that we can come up with. But if we don't resolve that, things are going to get a lot worse here, and I don't think any of us wants that. We want to keep things at least not getting any further out of balance than they already are. And right now it's pretty out of balance, and significant other development is going to make it much worse. Thank you.
Any clarifying questions? Daniel?
So Larry, you're to understand what you just said, you're saying there is no money, no county money, no state money, no federal money for infrastructure improvements for South Maui planning area?
Particularly in transportation. I mean, there's Mayor Bisson, just like other mayors in the past, have said, oh yes, we're going to complete the collector road, but even if we do complete the collector road, that's not going to fix our problem in terms of future development. That may help us deal with what we already have, but it's not going to help us with dealing with the future. And if we do lose a section of South Kihei Road in the northern area, that's going to make the burdens even worse. So I think we really need to very carefully tie our plans for commercial real estate, housing, etc., to our ability to get resources for infrastructure. Maybe we need to rethink the whole way we go about it. Maybe we're relying on the state and the federal government too much, and we have to invent our own solutions. I don't know the answers to that. I'm just saying we don't want to blindly proceed and say, okay, yeah, more housing, more housing, more housing, without fixing these other issues. And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Larry Stevens, and I'm testifying on my own behalf. Thank you.
Mike has a clarifying question.
Larry, as I'm sure you know, in our current little plan from '98, it does say in that plan, infrastructure concurrent with development. So we can put that in this plan too, but how in the world can we get that to happen? Putting it in the plan doesn't seem to make it work.
Well, I think that's the central question that this group needs to be taking into consideration and figuring it out. At least let's look at other communities, because this problem is not only ours. Every community has to deal with how they get infrastructure to support the other things they want going on in their community. But I think if we don't resolve that one, a lot of the other things that we do are going to be very peripheral. And I just hope that we can find a way to, I don't know if there's some improvement district. I'm not a planner. I'm not a local government person. I can't tell you the solutions. I'm just trying to encourage you to look for them and see if we can find some innovative ways out of this dilemma, because I know we all don't want to live in a place where we can't go faster than 25 miles an hour in and out of town, because that's where we're headed.
Do we have another testifier online? Just one more in person? Do we have another testifier in the room? Nope. In that case, we'll go to the next testifier online.
Kelly King.
All right, mahalo. Can you hear me? Can somebody give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Harry can hear me. Let's see the head nods. Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for going virtual and allowing us this opportunity to be in the comfort of our homes and when we're busy and doing other things as well. I want to go back to my previous statement. I've been gone for a week, so I'm not sure what happened in the interim, but I want to reinforce what Albert Perez wrote for Maui Tomorrow and Doug Ballard in the issue of the land use designations being too vague. I totally disagree with Ms. Iwohi that they are not meant to be broad. The land use designations should tell us who live in Kihei exactly what to expect from these different land use designations. And they don't. They have very vague language they say things like to include, but not only, and generally, and some of the other vague language that Albert Perez pointed out. One of the things that I heard the last time I was in the meeting was that you have to put in development or you're not planning. That is completely false. Planning, it can be planning for no growth, it can be planning for future growth, way in the distance. We don't know what we don't know. And had we done better planning 20 years ago, we wouldn't be having the flooding we have today. So I urge you not to put in this new map that has been put on the agenda. It completely replaces the old map, which was the map that was created with the stakeholders. The new map was showing all this this town center development in North Kihei seems to be following along what the developers' needs are and completely ignoring what the residents have been asking for the last several times that I've been here to testify. So I urge you to go back to the previous plan. I urge you to not make any decisions until you talk to people like Amanda Cording about the very serious drainage issues, until you talk to some of the environmental organizations that have been trying to protect South Maui and other parts of Maui. And these are the most important parts, I think, of the plan. So that is planning. You can put aside a piece of property. And I've heard from developers tonight, we're not even going to be doing this in the next 10 or 20 years. Okay, well, let's not plan it for the next 20, but let's not put it in the plan because we don't know where we're going to be at in 10 or 20 years. And theoretically, we would be starting to work on a new plan in 10 years if the county can get it together to actually follow the charter. So that's one of my big issues is let's go back to the original plans that the people of South Maui had actually implemented in our minds when we were asked to be stakeholders for this plan. The maps seem to be changing with the developers' input, and these are people who don't live here. I don't think we're obligated to help people make money just because they're landowners. I think we're obligated to our future generations to develop in a way that makes sense for them, to develop smartly, to give ourselves some room for the future. We have a Maui Island plan, yes, it's got some growth boundaries, but it's the community plan that decides how far to build towards those growth boundaries and when, in the next 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. So we are not obligated to plan for development just because it's in the Maui Island plan. And I think you all know that. I feel some very strong support for the community in some of the statements that have been made. But this to me, I mean, it's been called fragmented planning. I heard that term today. It's smart growth. If we start putting these land use designations in today, we don't know what the community is going to be like in 20 years. Today is a very different community from when this original plan was created. And I've been living here the whole time. So, you know, I've watched the growth. I was here on Maui before we even had our first stoplight on the entire
time's
island.
up, Kelly.
So anyway, that's my big push today is to ask you to please start listening to the environmentalists, start listening to more of the groups that live here, the Kihei Community Association, the Ma'alai Village Association, the Maui Meadows Neighborhood Association. All of us should have as strong a voice as the developers have, you know, being able to do presentations, talk about the history of what we've seen over the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years before you make those decisions.
Any clarifying questions for the testifier?
Different
Daniel?
section that I have.
Hi, Kelly. We're in the question. It's time for us to ask you questions. So this is Daniel. I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to turn my mic off so we don't get any feedback, and then you can answer it. So my question is, what are these original plans you're referring to? Maps, the original maps or plans, because we have maps that we're going to be looking at and discussing moving forward. So what are these original plans or maps you're referring to?
Okay, well, the last meeting I was in, there were two maps. There was a map that showed about half as much of this small town center in North Kihei as the one I'm looking at now. There were like two versions, and the one that had the less small town center was, I believe, the map that was in the original plan, and somehow it changed and it doubled or tripled the amount of small town center And I believe this is in line with what the developers had asked the planning department to do. But that's what I'm saying is that the community has come out and said, don't put that in there. We're not ready for it. We don't have the infrastructure. We're not likely to have the infrastructure in the next 10 or 20 years. And there'll be another community plan. And then we can see where we're at in 10 or 20 years with the infrastructure, with the type of people and the amount of people in our community. But what I'm looking at on the agenda is a map that shows extensive small town center in North Kihei, this little pink area that used to be about a third in the previous map. So I'm confused whether that decision has been made, why it is that the planning department is replacing the maps with their new ideas when we had, you know, the original idea supposedly came out of the community.
Well, thank you for that answer, and no decisions have been made. So the other question I had, and you know, as a former county council member, this idea of zoning and the community plan, land use designations. My understanding is that the zoning implements the community plan, and that from what I heard when I was attending CPAC meetings is that the community plan is a much closer, detailed determination of land use. So as a council member, I want to ask you what your view on the community, what is the role of community plan and zoning? How do they work together? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that question, Daniel. You know, from the time I got on the council, and I served 3 terms, but from the time I got on the council, and in the beginning 2 years I was planning committee chair, the planning department has been trying to align land use designations with zoning. And so, you know, in some of the talks with them and watching what happened with the West Maui community plan, they're trying to put the same land use designations into every plan. And I thought that as they're going through Chapter 19 and trying to change the zoning code, that their goal was to align the zoning structure with the land use designations, which I don't necessarily think is necessary. But I do think that the land use designations for the community plans should be as specific as possible, because we're living in these neighborhoods. Those of us who are longtime residents, what you're hearing from the people who don't want it seem to be the people who don't live here and don't really care about what we're dealing with on a daily basis. But you know, to me, the community plan is the most. It should supersede the descriptions. Should supersede zoning. So they should be much more specific so that we know what we're dealing with. And then, yes, the zoning does enable some of these types of developments to happen or not happen. But if we leave it open and as vague as it is right now, almost anything goes in almost all of these designations. You know, this is something that I've been talking about since the planning department first proposed these land use designations, and we, you know.
Any other questions for the testifier? Thank you. Do we have any more testifiers waiting? We do. Okay.
The last on the list is Dick Meyer. Yes, and then Susel, if she's still available.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. Mahalo for letting me speak remotely. I have not been with you, and I would have loved to have been, because I'm immunocompromised, and so this is the first opportunity I've had to speak. Briefly, some of you know me, but some of you don't. I was a former planning commissioner back in the early 1970s, 50 years ago, when Wailea was first before you, when the first community plan, the 701 plan, was put together for Kihei at that time. I was vice chair of the Upcountry Community Plan, where I live in Kula. I was also the vice chair of the Maui Island Plan, so I can give you some insights into the thinking of the Maui Island Plan if you care to hear about that. When I was on the Planning Commission, Wailea went through, they made promises to the commission that they would provide housing for workers on the upper parts of their property. They never did any of that, and it's still something that they should have done. Secondly, they promised that within the Wailea area, there would be an internal bus system or transit system so people in the upper parts of the property could come down to the lower ones so that big parking lots would not have to be built. And none of that has ever been done. Those are things that you should be thinking about when you designate areas and put provisions in and requirements in as you go through various projects and various areas of the South Maui area. Looking at the plan that's before you, I agree with some of the earlier testimony, Maui. Tomorrow's Senator Kelly King's testimony regarding the land use designations. They're much too general, and if you look particularly at Appendix F, like Frank, where it links the various community plan districts to the allowed zoning. It's so broad. Almost anything can be put in some of the residential areas, etc. I don't have to go through it in detail. I could, if you'd like me to go through it with you later on. The designations for each of the areas should be much more limited so that when somebody builds a house in an area or opens a store in an area, they'll know whether there's going to be an industrial operation next door, whether there's going to be a tall apartment building, etc. And I very much appreciate Rob Weltman's effort to redraft some of the language in the plan to take out some of that broad stuff and probably go even further. And I would use height limits and also maximum densities. So in other words, if you're saying there should be multifamily units, you could say no more than 10 per acre or 12 per acre, some number. Also using words like small businesses or mom and pop stores gives no indication. How big is a small store? Is the size, let's say, of the old Borders store, is that small? Certainly small compared to Lowe's and Home Depot. So I think you need clarifications when you say those things, rather than using like a small, using numbers like 8,000 square feet or 10,000 or some number that gives guidance. Also, there's a vague reference to when they.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, could you please conclude?
And a third category called noxious industrial, a wastewater plant or a quarry crushing operation should be considered a noxious activity and should definitely not be included near any residential areas and perhaps not even near other commercial or industrial areas.
Mr. Mayor, can you please conclude so we can ask clarifying question?
Maui Island Plan established. They were established largely to make sure that we did not have developers coming in and wanting to put developments in outside the urban growth boundary. It would be very expensive then to run school bus routes through into that area, wastewater treatment.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
Mr. Meyer, could you please wrap up your comments because we'd like to hear from the committee on clarifying questions.
That sort. That would indicate that perhaps 25 years, that would be an area that you may want to go into. Some number. Roles over what can go into that area. It should. And that makes it very clear, much easier to monitor the changes that take place over the years, rather than just saying.
Okay, we're gonna go to the next testifier. I'm not too sure if Mr. Mayor can hear us, but we're gonna call Suzelle James back on if she wants to testify. Suzelle.
Zone.
Okay, Suzelle, please unmute your mic and begin your testimony.
Hi, this is Suzelle James. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, great. Sorry about the before. I apologize. This is my first time doing this, so just making sure I'm doing it correct. So my name is Suzelle James again. I'm here just to testify about the organization that I'm in, and I'm hoping, I know we're on the agenda, it says North Kihei, so I'm hoping that what I have to say is all right with what the agenda is on, but I serve on the board for Kihei Little League, and we have over 250 kikis that are going through our program, and I'm here because we are in need of more fields. We have one rookie field right now with 5 teams, one minor field with 4 teams, one major field with 3 teams, one junior field with 1 team. And we share our field with other sports such as football and soccer. So I'm just here to testify that while you guys are planning for development, that you would take into consideration that we need more fields, and that we struggle to get permits. The county is always denying us on the certain dates that we want to use them for, because other sports are using them. Our season usually runs March through May, but we want to start earlier. We want to start in December, because that's when Lahaina and Central and Upcountry start their season. And because our season is so late, our kids are not able to play games against them, so we end up just playing each other, which doesn't really help them grow skill-wise. And then we have All-Star season. Then we have All-Stars in June, and that's when we Oh, can you hear me? Oh, can you hear me? Okay. So I hear an echoes. I'm hoping that you're able to hear what I said. So basically, I'm just here to testify that Kihei needs more fields, so the kids can participate in sports more, and that football can have their fields, and soccer can have their fields, and Kihei baseball can have their fields, and we don't have to juggle our calendars, and just like creating more fields will just have open up our schedule more, and just be able to grow our program, and the kids will be able to participate more and basically grow their skills, and this league prepares them for high school. Basically, these kids go through our program, and eventually they try out for sports for high school, and we just want to give them the best opportunity that they can have.
Any clarifying questions, the testifier? Mike?
Mahalo, Ms. James, for the good work you do with our keiki, and for coming out to testify this evening. You mentioned about the limited fields. Could you tell us where are your fields only in Kalama Park, or do you can you use part of the new community park? Thank you.
Our fields are only at Kalama Park. From my understanding, there is a baseball field by Lokilani, but that is only for softball, and the county does not allow us to use that field.
Mahalo.
Any other clarifying questions, Daniel?
Hello, Suzelle. This is Daniel. Thank you for navigating the system and being the first-time testifier ever. Congratulations. I just wanted to ask you, how many fields do you want?
How many fields do I want? As many as I can get. No, I mean, definitely Kihei is always growing, and we have to, adapt to our new generation that's coming every year or every 5 years. But definitely, we only have one field per age group right now, so it would definitely be nice to have at least 2. But I don't want to stop there. Maybe in 5 years we will need 3. Who knows how the population will grow.
Thank you, Suzelle. We'll work on trying to get you a couple more fields, hopefully. Thank you for being here.
Any other clarifying questions? Do we have anyone else waiting? We do.
Next is Albert Perez.
Aloha, can you hear me? Can you folks hear me? Okay, I'm turning off my speaker. Okay, I'll start my testimony. I'm Albert Perez. Aloha, Chair Weltman, committee members. I'm Albert with Maui Tomorrow Foundation, and I'd like to add to the written testimony that we submitted. We're here to share what we know about the planning process so we can make sure that your community plan will have enough teeth to help your vision become a reality. The community plan designation descriptions in the draft are ambiguous and will be difficult for the planning department to administer, difficult for the public to understand, and difficult to enforce because vague words are open to different interpretations. Even developers and their investors will wonder what's really allowed. On the other hand, the existing Kihei Makena community plan discusses specific uses that are allowed. You may want to borrow from those descriptions or even substitute them entirely. I would recommend that you create a separate category for light industrial that protects true light industrial uses like warehousing, light assembly, service, and craft type operations. Otherwise, they'll be driven out by businesses that can pay higher rent. Also recommend that you create separate designations for single family and multifamily instead of leaving them lumped into residential. You can then create a mix of designations on the map. I would hope that you would consider designating existing single family areas as single family so that longtime residents won't have to wonder if an apartment building will go up next to them. Transit-oriented corridor should be a corridor along a roadway instead of a wider polygon. The draft designations on the map do not fit the intent of getting people out of their cars. You are not restricted to creating large map polygons and hoping developers will create the right mix within them. While some developers may understand and do the right thing, others will not. And properties can change hands too. Promises made by today's owners may not come true, and that is what happened with the mega mall. If you use smaller polygons, you'll be more certain of the outcome. There shouldn't be small town centers of hundreds of acres. They should be used for small areas in the center of other residential and commercial. Otherwise, what you'll get will be very unpredictable, and it'll be very easy to build something like a mega mall. So in summary, we already have plenty of land designated for development that hasn't moved forward. We don't need any more. The best solution to get housing built quickly is to put affordable housing first in line for infrastructure. You have already adopted a policy that does that. Designating more land will create a time bomb of mostly market-priced homes for outsiders. When everything does get built, our infrastructure won't be able to handle it. Infrastructure is the priority for so many reasons to achieve quality of life. Mahalo.
Any questions to the testifier? Daniel?
Aloha, Albert. Thanks for joining us virtually. Just got your testimony, written testimony before the meeting. I haven't had a chance to read it all the way through yet, but I wanted to ask you about, some of the proposed expansion areas. Maka'api'ilani Highway, we were discussing that earlier. with some of the other testifiers. And I wonder what your view was on those uses. I don't know if you've seen the map, because that's what we're going to be talking about today. Mauka, Pi'ilani Highway.
Thank you, Daniel. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for the question. So, yeah, I saw the new proposal by the planning department to add on, I think it's 400 acres of small town center. I was actually kind of incredulous. And here's why. As a planner, I look at the methodology of the planning process. So the plan starts out by, for one thing, as I pointed out earlier, overestimating the amount of population growth that has occurred. And then it projects a continuation of past growth trends in tourism that the community doesn't want. Those population figures were used to come up with land use acreage requirements, which were then placed on the map. This new addition seems to have come out of nowhere and is not tied to the population and land use projections. If 400 acres of small town center are being added, then 400 acres of small town center should be removed from elsewhere on the map. Otherwise, the planning methodology is being ignored. Frankly, I think it's unnecessary to put anything up Mauka. You should be doing infill development and putting affordable housing first in line for infrastructure.
Any other questions? Thank you. Any further testifiers? Nope. Okay, it is time for a break. Let's take a 10-minute break. Public testimony is closed. Okay, everybody, we're going to start now. Please sit down. Vernon. Okay, let's have our seats. Okay, resuming the meeting at 7:23 p.m. So the next topic on our agenda is the land use designations themselves. And I'm just going to throw this out there because I don't want to short circuit if anyone has any other ideas. I think other ideas were proposed by testimony. Should we just start from scratch, or should we start from the proposed land use designations? Daniel?
Chair, in the Section 3 growth framework, we never really did have a discussion about 3.1. It was on the agenda last week, but mostly what we heard were presentations, but we didn't really review 3.1, which is, in the plan, page 53. Because are we going to be doing that at some point? Reviewing the language or what's in there?
You want to start all the way from page 53?
Well, we never discussed the growth plan, which is the foundation, the framework for the land use designations and the maps. So we're going right to the maps and the designations without discussing the foundation for the current land use designations and the maps as they are being proposed by the planning department. So I mean, it doesn't happen to happen tonight, but hopefully we can have a discussion on their, for example, their population forecast.
Well, if we're going to do it, I think we should do it now, because I don't think we should, otherwise we'll be very backwards. So Start from the beginning, page 53.
Can we do it today? We didn't post it.
That's true, we did not post it.
We'll let planning answer that. Does it have to be posted specifically?
If you're going to discuss it, it's supposed to be posted so people can give input on it.
So page 54 of the growth plan is in there in what is posted. So you have 3.1 includes page 53, 54, 55, and 56, 3.1. And page 56 is in there, the summary of community plan designations.
This is what was posted. It just starts on page 56. What was posted for this week's?
Yeah, so page 56 is part of that section 3.1. And then after page 56 begins section 3.2. So, I'm okay to wait till we post the whole section, but it seems like you'd want to discuss the framework for the land use designations and maps. If we wanted to have a discussion on that, I would, but I leave it up to chair's discretion.
So page 56 is exactly what I had proposed starting with, but if you want to start with a discussion about page 53. I guess we could discuss it but not make decisions. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Okay, Daniel?
So the first paragraph, let me turn back to page 53. The population of South Maui is expected to grow by between 3,700 to 6,100 new residents by 2045. I'm just reading it. This County of Maui Socioeconomic Forecast Report 2021. To accommodate this increase in population, the growth framework will help decision makers and agencies plan for the land uses, services, and infrastructure that South Maui needs now and in the future. The growth framework forms the foundation for land use and development decisions. It also provides guidance for efforts to update the zoning code, create new regulations. The framework comprises the community plan designations and the community plan map. It also explores areas of change that are expected to evolve over the 20-year planning period. So the forecast growth expectations of residents between 3,700 and 6,100 is based on this forecast. And whereas we have the census, the 2010 to 2020 census showed that the planning area grew by less than 1,000. I think it was 600 to 800 people or something like that. So this forecast model is what we're basing, in part, the land use designations and the maps are going to be looking at. So I don't know if I agree with the forecast, the projected forecast for how much the community is going to be growing in the next 20 years. I'm anticipating that this plan will probably be adopted in 2025. So we're looking at 2025 to 2045 with a low of 3,700 and a high of 6,100. I think the projections, the 6,100 is too high. and I think it would be closer to the lower end of the spectrum. I don't think we'll have the kind of growth that this is forecasting. Based on the census, for one, and so I think we need to take that into account when we make, moving forward, when we make decisions on the maps and the land use designations. So I just wanted to come out and make that comment. And from my own personal point of view, I do work with a demographic of about 600 to 700 people in the congregation that I belong to. And I've been keeping track of the number of members that we have in our congregation over the last 5 years. And so empirically, there has been a decline in the number of those coming in to the congregation as compared to those who are going out. We have a lot more people going out, meaning leaving Maui, and mostly moving to the mainland, a good percentage of them. And I've also noted with the youth, especially those who have graduated from high school, and we do have quite a few youth in our congregation. Many of them go to college, and the majority of them don't come back. They settle there, they find jobs there, often marrying there. So there's a smaller number of graduates that are returning to Maui because of the high cost of living. And if they come, they only come for a visit. So on my own personal observation, from folks that live in the South Maui district area, which is part of my congregation, I keep seeing this diaspora, people leaving Maui, especially our youth, are leaving and not returning because, as the saying goes, they're being priced out of paradise. They can't afford to live here. So I'm using the census data and my own observations over the last 5 years with people that live in this area that there is a change, and the population is, I don't think the forecast is going to be as high as being portrayed here. So I just wanted to make those comments and welcome anyone else who wants to comment on that population forecast.
I think it's kind of backwards. There would be more people here if there was more housing. There's a long waiting list. As soon as something opens up, like at Kaivahina, there's a long waiting list. If we had more housing, people would be here. If we had more affordable housing, those kids would not have to leave the county. So it's not a question of, okay, the population is declining, so let's build less housing. We're not building affordable housing. We're building affordable housing for the rich. And so, yes, people have to leave. I don't think it's backwards. Vernon?
Yeah, so, well, what's affordable, yeah. You know, and then the affordable don't line up with the pay that we get. You know, our classroom cleaners at Lokilani School only get $12 an hour. Custodians, low, mid $20 an hour, but they all work 3 jobs. So I don't know, like for me, I don't know what affordable is. You know, so I think that's the struggle is even if you build affordable homes, what would that price range be in 3-5 years from now? Kind of shared this with a couple guys, you know, lately, that if the Lokilani, if the new high school, when it opens, all 4 grades, when that school fully opens, like if it opens today, there's only 450 kids that is projected to attend that school, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Every year, all the schools in Kihei, the enrollment dropping because the families cannot afford to stay in South Maui, or they move back wherever they come from. Just as yesterday, we losing 14 teachers, 10 of them going back to the mainland, because even the teachers can't afford to stay here. So I sharing that because family, it's not family community anymore. 450 kids open today at Kulani Hakoi High School. I think that school is projected for 1,400, 1,600. Yeah, that ain't gonna get to 800 for a while. That school gonna be empty. So yeah, we like put correct housing down here, but how are we going to keep them here with the rate of pay that they have? Just thinking about like that right now. Thank you.
Everett?
I agree with Rob. I think it's, I think people are moving away. Daniel, you're right, but they're moving away because we don't have the housing. And this just talks about growth. This doesn't talk about the existing deficit that we already have. So I think we're going to need every bit of, I think we're going to be at the high end of this estimate if we were to take care of our people, if we were to build the housing to enable people to stay here, who grow up here and live here. And it's not just affordable housing. It's housing for professionals. It's housing for doctors. It's housing for 2 union households that don't qualify for affordable housing. We need the whole spectrum of housing. Right now, the affordable housing that's being built above the golf course here, which I think is 60% and below, they've got finished units that they can't get tenants for. So I think we're overbuilding at the very low end. Clearly, we're overbuilding at the very low end if they can't get tenants for the units. But we need the whole spectrum in order to keep the kids here. I mean, I think I've mentioned in an earlier meeting, I know of 2 boys who were born and raised here. They're twins. They went off to the mainland. They want to come home. Their family's here. They want to move back. They're civil engineers, and and we need civil engineers, and they can't afford to move home. I was with some people from the hospital on Monday for breakfast, and we just lost a doctor that we heavily recruited. We lost a doctor. He moved away because of lack of housing. In that case, it's not affordable housing, but just the lack of housing. So I think we're going to be, I think in order to put a good dent in our shortage, we're going to be at the high end of this estimate.
Yeah, so it's not only, sorry, Chair, may I? It is also job opportunities. And good paying job opportunities to be able to purchase whatever affordable is, you know. So it's just not the lack of housing, and just as importantly, it's good paying jobs. And it's just not the housing, it's all the other costs that go in to living on Maui. I mean, it's probably one of the most expensive cost of living areas in the country. So it's a combination of all those things. Yeah, housing is part of it, but it's not the only problem.
Mike?
Yes, on the, I think most of us would agree that the 2 so-called affordable rental projects, the second one from the same entity in the R&T Park, I had worked through the KA Community Association with them, so I get a lot of input from them. And what they explained to me was they start off with a lottery. So they immediately sell out. There's nothing available. So people don't apply. It's gone. But then when they go through the qualification process, people drop out. They were misrepresented or something is wrong. So those vacancies pop up, but people are not applying for them, or they're not people that are applying for them because they were built for families. Single individuals apply, and they say, well, no, these are 2 and 3 bedroom. So there's a lot of reasons why those aren't being filled. There's certainly the need, but there's a lot of complications involved why they're not, why they do have units available. And beyond that, the second thing that Daniel said, I mean, we all know that it goes way beyond the cost of housing. it's everything, because we all know that, yes, it probably is one of the most expensive places overall. So it's not only the housing, it's with the inflation, how much everything costs. The needs cost. How much does the food cost? How much does the gasoline cost? So it does go beyond the housing. And yes, unfortunately, that's what we've seen. What's being built is these new high-end homes for part-time residents. That's what's being built. And a few truly affordable, like these affordable rentals or the Kiola project, that too, they had that same issue. Immediately, because those were for sale, immediately sold out even before they were finished building, which they still are. But then people drop out. Then you see real estate signs there for sale, but people are not aware and are not applying. So it's more complicated than just saying, oh, well, yeah, they're here. There's a lot of complications involved. Mahalo.
I think another thing to take into account, besides allowing people, the children of people who grew up in South Maui to stay, is it would be really a good thing if people who work in South Maui were able to live in South Maui too. A lot of them would like to do that, but they can't afford to, or there's nothing available. And if people were able to live closer to where they work, that would benefit everybody. Less cars on the road, less congestion. I think everyone would be happier. So there's a need even beyond just the children of the people currently living in South Maui. Any other discussion about these initial pages on 3.1? Okay. So I suggest again that we, I'll throw out that question first. Can we process the designations proposed by the planning department, or should we start with entirely different designations? Everett?
Did the what's the background of these planning designations?
They are form-based planning designations to align with the updated zoning code, which is to be a form-based code.
And did it go through a vetting process? Was it before the planning commission or the county council or anything?
There was community outreach in the initial stages of developing the community plan designations. And then they also did go through the vetting process of the West Maui Community Plan and the adoption at County Council. If you completely started from scratch, and each community plan did that, it would make it very difficult to implement the plans. So it'd be better to use what you have. Rob's changes were actually just making it easier to read, and I think that's beneficial. But if you really start from scratch, that is going to make it very difficult.
Okay, so it was approved by the county council?
During the West Maui Community Plan update.
Okay, thank you.
It was the department's desire to keep consistent just from the sheer management and of the county land designations. Again, having it uniform between community plans seemed like what would be most appropriate. Similar to zoning, we want to have zoning somewhat uniform. Again, otherwise it can create challenges, I think, for community members at large, not only navigate the code, but also from the implementer standpoint. So that was the rationale for maintaining that consistency between West Maui and South, and then moving forward into Central.
Daniel?
So what I'm hearing is that are these land use designations exactly the same as the West Maui plan?
They are, but with the form-based code, the intention is that you have different forms appropriate for different communities. So you say this is going to be a denser area, this is going to be a less dense area, but it's not, and that's what's kind of hard, is we're using a Euclidean zoning underneath these community plan designations.
So is the answer yes, or?
The answer is yes, that they are the same, but they should be consistent throughout the community plans.
So, all right. So, there's this old saying, does one size fit all? every community is different, and I don't know if what is being proposed here may work for West Maui, but may not work for South Maui. And I think there are some designations for me that don't work for South Maui, and I guess we'll get to that when we get to the discussion. But yeah, it needs to be adapted to, I feel, whatever district we're talking about. So we're South Maui, we're not West Maui.
Vernon?
Okay, so I catching on. So yeah, so they set the standards, yeah, West Maui, and I get where you guys come in as planners, but what if the zoning that was implemented from west side, how that going to impact us on this side in South Maui? And I still feel, our community should have our own. And I know this was the draft, this was the template, and we're going based on that. So we might end up gutting this bugger because we like align something that fits South Maui and not West Maui. But I do understand that this thing can go a long time if each Moku did their own thing, but I think that's the appropriate thing to do.
So this is a big change from the 1998 plan and all the earlier plans, because this is much more broad, and that's both a good thing and a bad thing. I mean, it's a good thing in that small town center could look different in West Maui than South Maui. That's fully accounted for in the plan. In zoning, there is a difference. If you look at the zoning, the same zone can have different things in Lahaina than in the rest of Maui, because of their historical districts and things. So that can be done. And then, I personally think that West Maui and South Maui are the two districts of the county that are the most similar. I think we have the most in common. Really, the big differences are the historical districts in Lahaina and then the Mauka stretches. But otherwise, if you compare two districts in Maui, West Maui and South Maui have a lot in common. But I think the main thing really is just that these new designations are broad enough that they can be used for pretty much anything. We just need to define what they mean for us.
Yeah, the only thing we get common, get choke tourists. That's for sure. We get that in common. But as far like even the plan itself, the shape north to south all the way to Waikapu, that's weird. That should connect us with Mauka. That not happening on West Maui. They go Mauka to Makai, so we're not the same. We got cut short by 87% of, we're incomplete. So
we should merge with Upcountry. How's that? Okay, are there any objections to just going through the proposed designations? So let's do that. So, starting with rural residential. So the proposals I made here are not really to upend or replace the proposals. They're just to make sure that we get what it says we're getting, and that there are no surprises. And we can go through the additions that Albert proposed, I think, after we've gone through the ones that are proposed by the planning department. So if we start with this rural residential, which is on page 2 of my land use designation suggestions. It calls out as, it removes all these things about primary and may also, and puts in a section with permitted uses. So for rural residential, it would be low density residential, parks, schools, and farming. Daniel?
So this is what it's in the text. So we're not also comparing this to what you sent out.
I'm talking about what I sent out. This is page 2 of the land use designation suggestions. Not what's on the screen. What's on the screen is not relevant.
Okay.
Everett?
Rob, I like what you've done. I like the effort behind it. I think only thing I would suggest is that we delete farming from this.
Not allow farming in rural residential?
I'm just looking at Kihei, and I mean, realistically, there's not much. I mean, the soil conditions really don't lend itself to farming.
The language is kind of general. I mean, the original language is residential areas are generally developed with large lot subdivisions, family farms, and estates. I'm not sure there are any rural residential areas in Kihei.
I mean,
Maui Meadows.
Was in?
Maui Meadows is, but with a rural zoning, you are allowed to farm. It is a permitted use. Where, like other areas, you might be restricted in some of that.
Thanks.
Daniel?
I was going to say something, but I realized I can't talk about Maui Meadows because I live in Maui Meadows. I have own a home, so I have financial interest, so I can't talk about the area where I live.
Everett?
I move that we approve rural residential and the permitted uses that you're suggesting.
The only thing we would suggest is instead of permitted uses, saying something like envisioned uses, because permitted has to do with zoning.
I just want it to be something strong. So it's not like, we would like to have it, or it may be, or what among the uses are. But can you say allowed uses?
Karen, what did you suggest? What was the?
I said envisioned uses, but Garrett, thoughts on allowed uses?
I see your point, because zoning is what typically identifies as permitted, conditionally permitted, accessory, or not permitted. Anticipated, desirable. Appropriate.
Appropriate, I think is okay. Yeah, appropriate would work. Everyone okay with appropriate? Okay, so Everett made a motion. Is there a second? Second by Everett. I'm sorry. Second by Vernon. Discussion? Daniel?
I just wanted to read out the language in the Kihei McKenna Community Plan on page 54, land use categories and definitions for rural. It says this use is to protect and preserve areas consisting of small farms intermixed with low-density single-family residential lots. It is intended that at minimum the requirements of Chapter 205 HRS as amended shall govern this area. I know we're looking at this motion, but I do like the language that is already in the community land. I think I maybe like it a little better than I actually like the language in the rural residential.
More discussion? Any objections? Okay, adopted the definitions for rural residential. Oh, Daniel?
Oh, I did have another discussion point.
Okay.
Before I'd like to, a friendly amendment remove estates from the first sentence. Is it the first sentence? Let's see. Second sentence, rural residential areas are generally developed with large lot subdivisions, family farms, and remove estates. I understand estates as being, to me, it means a big house with a lot of land around it. I don't know if that's the best use of our land, to have a big house and a lot of acres around it. But anyway, I'd just like to remove estates as a friendly amendment.
I'd just like to point out that everything needs some kind of designation. So if an estate is not rural residential, then what would it be? I mean, there are estates. We do have them, and there will be in McKenna. So if it's not rural residential, what would it be? And also, I think, hopefully, what we're doing here is going to be helpful to the whole island as they move on to other areas to look at what we're doing here. So even if we don't have them, then they could be in other areas too. Ready? Okay. Okay. So I think we did adopt that. There were no objections. Oh, Daniel? Okay. So you want to take a vote? Okay. Those in favor of the proposed language for rural residential, please raise your hand.
Point of order.
Yes.
Do we need 7 to approve something?
We do.
So you would need to vote on that?
Yes. I'll vote if there's not enough. And those against? Yeah. Okay, so I'll vote yes. So 7-2. Next is residential. And so again, my purpose here was not to change the language or the intention, but just to call out specifically what's allowed, rather than saying that it typically does or it may include. Daniel?
Chair, I like what you did, pulling it out like this, because I think it makes it easier to read. And so I like that.
And I think consistent with what we said last time, it should say appropriate uses rather than permitted uses. Everett?
Just for clarification, small scale, does that mean, are we referring to a small number of units? Are we referring to low rise, or what was the intent with small scale?
So again, I didn't really introduce this language. I just moved it down from the main section above. But Karen, do you want to say what small scale means in this context?
So on this one, I can only speak of how I actually envisioned it. Would be smaller buildings, so it's not a huge tall building in the middle of your neighborhood.
2 to 3 story building.
Vernon?
Is this the part we say it's only can be 20 feet high? Oh, it's 1 star. Oh, 25?
In the community plan, stories would be more appropriate. You can't really put heights because that is zoning.
What we can do is define which zones are allowed within this community plan. So.
You can also suggest language for when the zoning code is updated, saying which kind of zones you would support, or I mean, which heights you would support in certain zones.
So currently in the appendix F, I think it is, it says that residential can have apartments that are max 35 feet high, or apartments max 60 feet high. So that's what we could change. We could say we don't want any A2 zones in residential. And that's how we would control that.
Yeah, I would agree with removing A2 apartments 60 feet high. It's, I think, a 6-story building in a residential area. I don't think it would be I think it'd be a incompatible use, in my opinion. That's too tall. It would have, I think, unintended consequences. So I don't know if this would apply to existing neighborhoods, you know, once you make the change. If in existing neighborhoods, if the opportunity was to build A2 apartment buildings, if they could do that, could they? If this passed, would this also, well, it would, right? Because we would say residential. We would change the land use designations for current and future land uses. So if it was residential, then it would seem to me that in an existing residential neighborhood where there are no 60-foot high buildings, they could put it in, because it would be allowed, wouldn't it?
It would have to come in for a change of zoning, but another option would be to put on the for mixed use designations, it says the scale and character of the surrounding area. So that's a way to address it as well.
But it's already included in the residential. I'm looking at this thing, and in residential it includes A1 and A2.
I'm saying in this language up here, at the end, adding with the scale within the scale and character of the surrounding neighborhood, so that it makes it clear it shouldn't just be like a random 60-foot tall building in the middle of a neighborhood.
We do have some A2 zones in Kihei, Wailea right now, but they're not that tall. So having that zoning doesn't necessarily mean they'll be that tall, but eliminating that zoning as an option for a community plan area would mean that would definitely not happen.
I think over time, we're going to be, the community might be more inclined to have less sprawl and more density. I think leaving it in there gives the future residents the options.
So I would suggest a small scale is appropriate here and not go any further than that in defining what's involved. And we can discuss later on if the Appendix F and which zones are appropriate.
So we could add that to the appendix. What is the definition of small scale?
We wouldn't add that. We would just change which zones. We would say that that A2 is not an appropriate zone for residential. In South Maui.
Chair, the other one would be commercial uses, small-scale commercial uses. I think we would probably need a definition for that. What does that mean, small-scale commercial uses? It compares it to Yeah, it says small-scale commercial uses that serve the immediate neighborhood may also be permitted on a limited basis, provided they are pedestrian-oriented or will generate minimal vehicular traffic. So, could we put in language to define what small-scale is? Could we use square footage?
That is the zoning code, but you can make a recommendation that you would like to limit the size of stores in the neighborhood, like an action to say when the zoning code is updated, limit the size of stores in the zoning code.
Oh, sorry, Karen. Where would we do that?
Creating an action to say. It is also defined kind of by Rob right there, just saying that it has to be pedestrian oriented. You can't have really a huge store that's pedestrian oriented because you'd have to have parking spots for the number of people you're going to have.
Chair, well, what comes to mind in South Maui is when they wanted to put up a Walmart in where next to McDonald's, and the community was very unhappy about the size of the proposed, not Walmart, Walgreens. Walgreens, right? Because of the scale. And because of the community pushback, I think they eventually, I don't know about the pushback, it was part of it. But maybe if they didn't give up on it, they could have put a Walmart in there. And I know the community would have been really unhappy with it. So maybe to Walgreens, maybe to them the scale was small because it's pedestrian, people could walk to it, right? It was pedestrian orientated, minimal traffic, I guess. So a Walgreens may have been built in that area despite people's objections. So that's what I'm like, is a Walgreens too big for a residential area?
Walgreens would definitely not be developed to serve the immediate neighborhood. That is a regional scale. You're not developing a Walgreens for the immediate neighborhood. This is more like a little restaurant someone has. I don't know if you've ever been to a restaurant in somebody's house. They have them in other countries. Or it's supposed to allow, I would actually personally love if my neighborhood had just like a little tiny shop in somebody's front room so that I didn't have to go to the grocery store. And that's more the idea, is to allow a little bit of mixed use. So you don't have to leave your residential neighborhood in order to get something, but it should be small. Kauai actually has a law to ban big box stores, and I think it's 75,000 square feet. You can't build anything over that, so it limits big box stores. This is something to consider. Maybe we could talk about it as a policy, but that's a question for Garrett.
I move that we approve residential with, and just substitute appropriate instead of for permitted.
Is there a second? Second by Vernon. Vernon. Yeah, so currently residential says in Appendix F that it supports business type B1, which is neighborhood business of max 30 foot high. It doesn't say the square footage. but does not support B2 or B3. But again, those things can be further defined. More discussion? Daniel?
So Chair, are we going to further define it at another time, or?
No, I mean, zoning is further defined. We can have further restrictions on zoning in South Maui.
I see.
Yeah. I don't think it's appropriate to have square footage in the community plan. I think that's a zoning level thing. Further discussion? Any objections? Okay, fine, we've adopted this section on residential. Rural village. See, do we have any rural villages in South Maui? No. Daniel?
Yeah, this is one of the land use designations that I don't think fits in South Maui. It says, rural village community intended to preserve the character of Maui's small rural towns. Maybe once upon a time we did have a rural town, but I don't think we have rural towns anymore. And then I compared all the zoning designations for the rural village, and all the same zoning designations are found in residential, neighborhood center, and small town center. Include all of those associated zoning designations that are in blue. So I just think this is one we can remove. And I'm going to make a motion to remove this land use designation, rural village.
Second by Mike. Any discussion? Any objections? Okay, removing the rural village designation from the South Maui plan. Neighborhood center. Now we're starting to get into more complex things here, I think. Oh, and this actually does have a proposed limit on height. Let's see.
I suggest that we eliminate that limit on height. Pick that up in the zoning code.
Okay, yeah, so I see that in the zoning code, B1 is 30 foot high and B2 is 90 foot high. And in the proposal, the neighborhood center can have both of those, whereas residential can only have B1. So we can solve that problem by just changing which zones are mapped to that designation. Daniel?
So if I just heard you correctly, by recommending we remove B2 and keep B1?
We're not actually discussing the mapping to zonings right now, but yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, that's what I think I heard you say something along that line.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That would solve the same problem in a better way.
So I move we approve this with two changes: permit it to appropriate, and delete building shall be limited to 25 feet in height.
Is there a second? Second by Vernon. Discussion?
Chair?
Yes.
So, Everett, you're just, your motion removing the 25-foot height, is that the only sentence? Okay.
And my thinking of that is townhouse is usually two-story, sometimes three-story townhouse if you have a garage on the ground floor. So that would exceed 25 feet.
Chair.
Yes.
In the mixed commercial, number 3, mixed commercial residential, which, do we want to put a percentage, or do we want to say mostly residential, majority residential, 50%, more than 50%? Because potentially you could end up with 90% commercial and maybe 10% residential. So what do we want? Do we want to see more even mix, 50-50, something along that line? Do we want to kind of give some guidelines in there regarding the mix of commercial to residential?
I had a question for you, Karen. Do you know if this was intended to be vertical mixed use, as in like a neighborhood store with apartments above? Okay.
Yeah, this is like, you guys do have that area in South Kihei Road, yeah? What is the name of that?
Lipoa and South Kihei Road, that corner.
Yeah, that corner where it's
Where
like
it's
the bottom part is...
Work-live units.
And it enables people to have businesses that they live above. It's an older style of development. So that's not one you want to limit. If there is anything where you want to put a percentage of residential, it'd be more appropriate to do it in area-specific policies when you're actually discussing the land uses. But this is also kind of like the rural village they do all have the same uses. The rural village is intended for like 4 corners. The neighborhood center is supposed to be a little bit larger. It's the amount of land it's covering and the amount of people it's serving.
So can it be any size? Can it be 10 acres, 20 acres, 100 acres?
The designations were not intended to cover large acreages. The mixed use designations is intended to identify where the mixed use was going to go within the broader development.
I don't know if that answers my question. It can be any size within the designated area, the village.
And Mike?
Yeah, I just have a question on the written form. We have, under permitted uses, we have 7, but on the screen we only have 5. Why were those other ones pulled out? Was that discussed?
Are they on the next page? Nope. There should be a 6 and a 7.
Good eye.
There should be. I don't know why they're not there. Do you guys? So we can read is it the single family homes and Ohana units and accessory dwellings, duplex and triplex dwellings. I don't know why when I took it off the drive it ended up different.
Yes, so 6 and 7 are commercial uses that service neighborhoods up to 1/4 mile away, and public, quasi-public uses such as parks, schools, and churches.
All right, I'm going to amend just for clarity, amend my motion to include duplex, triplex dwellings, and townhouses.
I took this straight off the drive. I really don't know what happened. I'll just read all the permitted uses. Small lot single family, small lot multifamily residential, duplex and triplex dwellings, townhouses, mixed commercial residential, commercial uses that service neighborhoods up to 1/4 mile away, and public quasi-public uses such as parks, schools, and churches.
Further discussion? Daniel? Any objections? Lehua?
My question would be for permitted uses, number 6, commercial uses that service neighborhoods up to 1/4 mile away. So is that every quarter mile that you can have a commercial use, or can somebody maybe explain what this means? So if it's a 1 acre or 2 acres, you can either have 4 or 8 commercial uses, and that's number 6. That's written here, not on the screen.
This is intended to define the scope of a commercial use. In other words, the idea is this is not something that people drive from Kahului to go to. It's something that people who live in the neighborhood will go to. So if it's going to be if it's going to be a commercial use that's services like all of Kihei, then it wouldn't be a neighborhood center. It would be like a small town center. That's kind of the difference between them. So one of them has large scale, the other one has small scale, only commercial.
Sorry, I still don't understand. I'm just thinking that if it's a 2 acre property or area, that for every 1/4 mile that you'd have a commercial, whether it's a little store or something. So just trying to understand the scope of what would be able to be in that. So I think it's kind of something that what Daniel was saying about the mixed commercial residential usage, what is the percentage? So I'm just trying to figure out what number 6 means. Or does it, if everybody understands it, but just me, I don't know. I mean, somebody can explain it, because I don't understand it.
Okay, it's not really about the distance between stores. It's about what those stores serve. In other words, did they serve the neighborhood, or did they serve the entire city, or the entire island? So one would be a neighborhood center, next one would be a small town center, and the third one would be a transit-oriented corridor. So for a neighborhood center, they would not be stores servicing all of Kihei.
Okay, I'm sorry. I still don't understand, but we can proceed.
Daniel, and then Garrett.
I was going to chime in that 1/4 mile distance is generally like a 5-minute walk. And so often that's been sort of thrown out there. If you want a walkable neighborhood, people will stay out of their car and just stay on foot for that 1/4 mile distance. And so again, it's just sort of a rule of thumb for dispersing a little bit of commercial throughout a neighborhood.
I appreciate you explaining that. So now it makes sense, because I got to visualize, because I don't want to have, see tons of little places in a little small area. So that makes more sense. So thank you.
Daniel?
Oh, okay, so commercial, what's the language you're using? Not permitted uses?
Appropriate uses.
Appropriate uses, okay. So a lot of the land use designations do have commercial uses, and I understand the benefit of commercial uses in a neighborhood, so you can walk there, get your basic needs. But as we move on to the other designations, I'm wondering, by having more commercial uses in these residential areas, for example, if that's going to affect existing commercial areas and potentially dry them up. It's not exactly apples to apples, sort of apples to oranges, but when they built Target and the other stores, Lowe's and so forth, the Dairy Road Mall pretty much became a ghost mall. Pretty much killed it. And I'm just a little worried about all these commercial uses in residential areas impacting existing commercial centers in Kihei, right? Because people are going to go shopping in their neighborhood, which is good, because they can walk there, bike there. But then they'll be shopping less in the other stores. So they'll be competing with each other. So maybe the unintended impacts of this is that you may kill the existing commercial centers, or you may need to have to repurpose them because they're loss of business. They will lose business, you know. I think that could be a consequence of commercials opportunities spread out rather than centralized. So this is a thought.
This is not going to be a target.
But they could get repurposed to residential, which should be a good thing.
Yeah, I could see that happening in the strip malls down in, you know, people who are on the, watching us right now, South Key Road may not appreciate the idea that we're talking about repurposing their businesses because of the decisions that may affect land use coming in the future. But, you know, it's going to affect people's lives, so I think we need to take that into consideration.
Personally, I think it's a huge benefit and quality of life to be able to go walk to a bakery, cafe, something like that, right near where I live. I mean, I used to be able to do that, and I can still do that where I live right now. I wish more people had that opportunity, so they didn't have to get in their car just to buy a loaf of bread or have a cup of coffee.
No, I understand, I agree. I'm just kind of showing the other side of the coin, you know. Yeah, it's a benefit, but there's also a cost to it, to maybe other businesses.
Any more discussion? Any objections? Okay, adopted with those two changes. So what we're doing is moving up the scale from low density to high density. Next one is small town center. And I guess to be consistent with what we just said, we should remove the building height limit here and control that through zoning. Daniel?
Okay, I just want to read the first sentence. The small town center community plan designation is intended to preserve the character of Maui's smaller towns and communities and allow for development of new neighborhoods. So this, to me, this kind of gets back to the rural village and to preserve the character of Maui's small towns and communities. South Maui doesn't really have small towns, but we do have communities. So in the Kihei McKenna Community Plan, it doesn't talk about towns in the Kihei McKenna Plan. It talks about unique communities. And that's what we have. We have unique communities like Ma'alaya, Kihei, Wailea, and McKenna. But I can't say that there are small, that we have small towns that, yeah, I don't think calling it a small town center fits for South Maui. I think if I was to rewrite the first sentence, I would maybe write something like this: the small communities. Maybe the small community center plan designation is intended to preserve the character of South Maui's unique communities and allow for development of new low to medium density commercial centers, etc. So I think it's more accurate to talk about communities rather than small towns. I don't know who looks at South Maui with small towns. I don't.
Everett?
Daniel, what if we put a comma after communities? So the first part of the sentence talks about, since this is going to be in all the community plans, what if we put a comma after communities, and then the next part would probably be relevant to Kihei or South Maui, and allow for development of new low to medium density commercial centers? So the first part isn't relevant, but the second part of the sentence would be relevant.
Could you read the whole sentence the way that you're suggesting?
The small town center community plan designation is intended to preserve the character of Maui's smaller towns, comma, and allow for development of new low to medium density commercial centers with a mix of uses that service nearby neighborhoods.
Oh, I see. I kind of wanted to make it specific to South Maui. You know, that we're preserving South Maui's unique communities.
Ideally, the small town center designations should be used throughout Maui. It'll make life much easier for everybody, rather than having one that's specific to South Maui.
Yeah, good for all of the rest of Maui. I'm talking about South Maui. But yeah, anyway, in the Kihei Mechanic Community Plan, it talks about unique communities. Does not talk about towns. So anyway, this is my thoughts for what it's worth.
Lehua?
I support what Daniel is saying, so I don't think it would hurt if we put it in there rather than omitting what's there, but we can add it because I agree that, you know, Kihei is unique. Of course, you know, back in the days where we grew up, pseudo store and no highway and all that, I mean, Kihei was country before, so, but I think it's important to put that in so we can kind of, you know, be our own, but yet still be part of the STC that's stated here. So Daniel, I'd like to encourage you to make a motion to add that in, the verbiage, because I support that idea.
I don't think it was a motion.
You can make the motion.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking you if you want to consider making a motion.
Oh, I don't. What was the language? Maybe you can.
No, you said it, how you said it was good.
I don't know.
The unique. I mean, you know.
Okay, from the Kihei Mechanic Community Plan, it says under unique communities, 4 communities comprise the region Ma'alaya, Kihei, Wailea, Makena. The unique and special attributes of these communities should be nurtured and enhanced. So somehow I want that, you know, that in there.
Yeah, what you had said at the beginning was perfect, but don't ask me to repeat what you said.
I don't remember what I said at the beginning.
That was not a land use designation. That was just a characteristic of the area.
Yeah, exactly. It's just what's going to be in the text, right?
Well, no. One is a characteristic of the area. One is a characteristic of this particular designation, which is one of many designations for South Maui.
No. I don't have a motion.
Mike?
Yeah, I get that it makes it easier if we make these fit each community plan, but that kind of defeats the whole purpose. And why are we having individual community plans? Why don't we just have one community plan for everybody, and it all has to fit? I mean, to say small town center, it doesn't fit our community. We don't have small towns, and when over the years, when issues came up about doing things for small towns, and we'd say, well, to the county, why is South Maui not included? Well, because you don't have a small town. That fits Lahaina, and it fits Paia. Doesn't fit South Maui. You don't have small towns. So at some point, it has to be individual to us, or we're just wasting our time if we're trying to make this one general thing that's going to fit all community plans. I don't see how that's going to fit. So just using that term, small town, doesn't fit our community.
The term is kind of irrelevant. We have different levels of density. Should we have multiple levels of density, or should we only have 1 or 2? If we're going to have multiple levels of density, we have to have some designation for it. And it really doesn't make any difference what the wording is. What makes a difference is what it implies, what comes with it, and that's what follows after that. So, I mean, for West Maui, originally they had a designation called urban corridor, but people said, oh no, we're not urban, and so it became transit-oriented corridor. The content is the same. I mean, that's what we have to look at. So yes, we could come up with a different words other than small town center, but do we need a density which is intermediate between neighborhood center and transit-oriented corridor? I think we absolutely need that. Karen?
That was it. It's about the density of the area. It also does say the small town center community plan designation is intended to preserve the character of Maui's smaller communities. I mean, if you take out town, but it is towns and communities because these designations are intended to be able to be applied throughout Maui, because it will get really difficult to apply these plans if the names are constantly changing and the intents are constantly changing.
Chair.
Yes.
So yeah, I guess that's what I'm struggling with, is understanding what we're doing, right? This process of land use designation, and then it's a template for all of the other community plan areas, and it's really about density, whatever, regardless of we title it small town center, and it's I'm trying to understand it and yet make sense for South Maui. But I don't know, it's so frustrating for me because it's South Maui Community Plan. We have this template. It's all about density, and it doesn't matter what you call the land use designations because they're supposed to be good. The plan is to make it apply to every other community plan area. So I'm just expressing my frustrations with trying to work through this. Thank you.
So the allowed uses or appropriate uses, that's what defines it. So, Kyoki.
Thank you, Chair. No, my comment is just what I was going to be on, just what you said. The appropriate uses are what's helping me. All the language, that's why, like last week, if you remember, when we had a stump on that triangle area in Maui, I abstained from voting because our choices were small town center and I believe right. So if the appropriate uses are more clear, I think it would help a lot. You know, I'm just using that little example as other areas because we can get lost in all that other language up above, but what it boils down to is, for me anyway, is the appropriate uses. And that's why I had such a tough time with that triangle area, because it's hard to envision. But if you stick to what you can and cannot build, I think it would help us designate these areas. Thank you.
We still do not have a motion.
Kyoki, this designation kind of fits what is currently in the triangle. It's like that kind of density where it's like 2 stories, you have a lot of smaller shops.
Correct.
Yeah. So that is what this is.
Right.
That's like if you want status quo, that's what you would put there.
Yeah. And like Daniel commented earlier that he appreciated chairs, drawing that down just to kind of simplify things, because sometimes we get lost in all the other language. So I mean, if we move to, what exactly are we, you took that from the language above, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, so I guess I'll make a motion to adopt this.
Are we going to take out the building height and put allowed uses?
Yep, same two changes, I think. So appropriate uses and
appropriate uses.
Yeah.
But you're asking me if this motion is including taking out the limit? Yeah, we leave the height. Yeah.
The height is for zoning. That's why it's been removed from all the other designations.
Okay, so what you saying, we move the height to zoning?
The zoning is the one who implements heights.
Okay, once it goes to zoning, how much we can weigh in the community? Because the zoning, we have no control on that, right? Is that, you know what I mean? So,
So in Appendix F, it says a small town center can have B1 or B2. If it's limited to only B1 and not B2, then we get the 30-foot max height.
The triangle already has B2 zoning, just.
Well, this should apply to, redevelopment, things like that.
Can planning change the zoning?
Planning is working on the Title 19 rewrite, which would be changing how zoning is done. It's a rewrite, and that's where an action item or a policy, not as much in the description of the small town center.
Can the planning director change the zoning? A good one, yeah.
We'll let Garrett answer that.
No, I guess to your point, there's going to be ample opportunity for the community, not just the CPAC, but the community at large, to see what that future zoning rewrite looks like. Again, it's been underway for a couple of years. I'm anticipating it's going to be a couple of years longer since it's a full rewrite. So there will be opportunity for people to see proposed new heights, square footage maximums, and so forth. But yeah, so again, that the Title 19 rewrite will address the new zoning. But you are correct. I mean, conceivably there could be a county-initiated rezoning of a piece of property. Typically, is done by a private individual's request, but I mean, there could be a county-initiated one.
So, could this rewrite improve the community to have a better position and say than what it is today?
I think that what we're hoping for the rewrite is a substantial improvement. The current zoning is quite dated. It's less form-based. It's more, Euclidean zoning, which is in the past really based on separating different uses, which is why we see a lot of the communities now where residential is so far away from commercial. It got away from maybe what historically communities were like that let people live and work right nearby. So that really is the intent. Is the code rewrite is to update it substantially, probably look at a lot more mixed use, trying to tackle some issues that weren't conceived in years past. But yeah, the hope, hands down, is that it'll be an improvement and provide an ample opportunity for the public's input.
Yeah, that's just my fear, that we have no control over that. And then when this rewrite, you guys expect this to happen?
It's scheduled to be presented to the council in 2025.
Oh, yeah, that's jam up, I think. You know what I mean? It's kind of, so in the next 2 years, things can change. Oh, no, but then this thing might take 3-4 years, right? Our community plan. I mean, yeah, it might work out.
Personally, I think pretty much all bets are off with the new zoning. I think it's going to be a whole new ballgame, a whole new discussion about how things are going to be applied and how these rules are going to be interpreted. What we have right now are these B1, B2, B3, and that we do have control over. So, at this time we can say which ones of those we want it to apply. But I really think things are going to change radically with the new zoning. Luhua.
So what I understand is the operative word is could, so it's possible. But is it possible to say buildings should be limited to rather than shall? Because should is a suggestion, shall is more of a, not a command, but is that possible? Or just don't even put it there? Because if we are afraid that, you know, the zoning might change and might say, no, you can go higher than what it's here. I mean, you put that there, Rob. So you must feel too that 35 feet is the max. And then we as a community, if we feel that too should be, you know, the max. But if we're told that that's a zoning thing, but if we just change that word shall to should, is it possible to still then have it in here? So they can see that this is really how we feel? Is that worth it?
It would be better as a policy because changing the designations is so we can write a policy that buildings in this should be limited to 35 feet.
I think some of our discussion in the past too was maybe getting away from that foot limitation and looking at stories. So if we were talking about maybe lower scale commercial, maybe it was in the range of 1 to 3 stories, versus let's say higher density housing. Are we talking about 4 to 6 stories? But again, almost giving like a general ballpark for the massing of that building or size. But
Daniel?
So do stories have you're talking about 2 stories. 2 stories can be any height. You can have 15 feet, 20 feet. First floor can be 20 feet. The next floor can be 15 feet. That's 35 feet. So stories don't necessarily relate to height then.
Some of it would get back into the definition. A lot of communities put a maximum height per story. So if somebody comes in, they're not going to, say, oh, I've got a 1-story building, and then have enough clearance to actually put in another deck. But yeah, that's a way around, setting that actual number. But yeah, typically the height limit in feet would be limited in the zoning code proper.
I'm pretty sure that was limited by the Maui zoning code when there was the Napili house built.
So, Chair, we're just lay persons. We're not professional planners. We depend on you folks to guide us, but we're trying to achieve a preferred vision for the future. And it seems from what you're saying, Karen, that if we want to specifically give more guidance to how we want these land use designations to be applied, we need to put it in the language of policies and actions and not here. So what are we doing here then? How are we attaining our vision for the future and here right now with these land use designations? There's like 2 parts to it. This is like part 1, and then now part 2 is we have to do more policies and more actions in order to convey to planners and what it is we're trying to see as land use. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's challenging. I do think the way Rob separated out uses and has them listed down below helps make it clear what's expected to be in those areas instead of a long paragraph. You also have to consider if each plan has too much in each designation and there's a million places to look for different items, then the person processing your plans are not going to look at those because the planner's going to be looking at policies. They're going to probably think small town center is consistent So having it consistent, but having the uses listed is useful. But having it change between each community plan is going to make it really difficult to actually implement the plans. And it will end up not getting you what you want, because too much information, and information in a lot of different places, doesn't help you direct what you want. It just makes it like overwhelming. So then you just go with your gut, and the planner's gut might not match what you guys want. So things put in the correct location is going to help. But this being defined like this does help. It gives a very clear, okay, low to medium density commercial. It does also say follow the scale and character of the surrounding area. So that's something that will be across the community plans, looking at the scale and character of the surrounding area. But also the defined uses. What you guys are doing here could also apply to West Maui, because it's not changing them, but it's defining the uses for the community plan designations. So it's easier to understand.
Vernon?
Can we leave that and then add it into actions and policies, or in the zoning? Like, can we leave that like as a buffer? The more the merrier. Because it's there already, but then we're gonna move it to zoning. I don't know.
Do you mean the height limit?
Yeah, the height limit.
It's just not a place where it's going to have the impact that you want.
Okay, so this, what we seen up here is part of the community plan?
It is part of the community plan, but think of somebody who's, okay, you have a lot of work to get done, and you're looking at 4 different plans from 4 different communities, and you need to look at each community plan designation and see how they align and make sure. You're gonna go down something you can click off easily. The more information, sometimes more information is not helpful. It just putting things in more and more places, it just gives you more and more to look at.
I was thinking if we do remove that 35 feet in height, that last sentence at least provides, some expectations. That it still needs to be following the scale and the character of the surrounding area. So, again, hopefully that'll provide more assurance, even if that number of feet isn't black and white in this paragraph.
But we have a motion on the table from Keoki, and so if he doesn't modify it, then we need a second and then to discuss. You had a comment, Kavika? So is there a second for Keoki's motion? Second by Vernon. Comment, Wayne?
I wonder if this motion will bring about unintended consequences. Being a small businessman, I see the advent of the Costco's, the Walmart, or the Targets. Having a small business in Wailuku, I see, and maybe Kie, you see the vacancies in a lot of the small businesses in Wailuku Town, Azeka's, second floor, empty, unoccupied, and I guess you're trying to support the small businesses. But if you're trying to, bottom line, provide a healthy business climate in Maui, you may see ghost towns happening amongst the commercial centers in Kihei and Azekas. Ka'ahumanu, Maui Mall. Look at all the vacancies occurring. I just worried about that.
Any more discussion? I think Azeka is a small town. Yeah, it is a small town center in the proposed plan.
You see the Northern Store gone, and you see the Afuks gone. You see the Suda Store gone, and now you see the Azekas are gone. Are we going to create an environment that becomes so impersonal that when we were used to being friends and going to different stores that we like to do, all gone? The personalism is going to disappear if we are subject ourselves to supporting, which I don't like, the corporate.
So Azeka, Lipoa Center, those are all small town centers in the draft plan. Any further discussion? So the motion is as written, except appropriate uses rather than permitted uses. Any objections? Okay, objection. Okay, those in favor, please raise your hand. Vernon, you're abstaining? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. And those against? Okay. Okay. And those abstaining? Okay. So we do not have a small town center designation. Vernon?
Here we go home already. Man, I like sleep. Oh, and then this just crossed my mind. So Cody should be online, right? So if we, you know what I mean? So we never take his vote, right? And then the other thing, I think he should be on live, the video, and we're supposed to ask him who else stay in the room. So
that's my end of the meeting alarm. But Cody was online. He did not want to turn on his camera, so that's why he was not in the meeting. Because he can't be. You have to have your camera on.
And then and then who else was in the room with him?
That's part of the reason you have to have your camera on. But yeah.
Wayne and then Lehua.
Question for planning. If you're online, can you vote?
As long as you have your camera on.
Quick question before we close. So when we get written testimony and there's questions or concerns, what is our responsibility to address them? Because we seem to be getting written testimony and then we don't say anything about it. Is that? I just want to make sure before we leave tonight that we're addressing
Your
any
responsibility is to read the written testimony, and if their concerns that you think need to be brought up, then you should bring them up. But this meeting is likely to be recessed.
Okay. But I just want to make sure, because I know sometimes we have things, but we don't bring it up. And so, like, who brings it up? I mean, myself or the chair or vice chair. But I don't want to avoid something that we're supposed to be doing when something is brought to our attention. So I didn't know what the protocol was.
That's why we try to get testimony as early as possible so that we can provide it to you guys so that you guys can take that into consideration so that when we come to the meeting, if it's appropriate, then you guys factor that into your guys' discussion. It's on you guys to kind of weight the testimony depending on, you know, what is shared and the timing that is provided. But absolutely, if something piques the interest or should be discussed, then you bring it up at the meeting.
I just want to make sure, because if we get it early enough, we read it, we should all be reading it, and I just don't want it to, like, not be attention to it. Yeah. Okay. All right.
Okay, so I'm going to recess the meeting, but I will ask those who voted against this to propose to come up with an alternative definition and submit it to everyone so we have time to think about it before the next meeting, so we can make it past it. Okay.
Just real quick, thank you to you guys for staying. I know we didn't use you tonight, but that's kind of how we roll. Thank you, yeah.
Okay, recessing the meeting at 9:02 p.m.